Chapter 465. F***CK Look, I really want to beat them up. Forget it, David. Think about it. How many of us will survive on the battlefield in a few days? What's the point of arguing with dead people? Well, that makes sense. Damn, Luke, I've realized that ever since you were conferred the title of Grey Coat Arrow Marquis, you've become more and more enlightened. F***CK off. At noon, on both sides of the bare official road, a large group of soldiers sat on the ground and had their lunch, chewing on flattened yellowish pancake. The corners of Tangen's mouth curled up slightly as he looked at David and Luke bickering. He couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle. A few days ago, after they set off from Vesa City, they had rushed to the battlefield without stopping. However, the northern region was vast. Although they had reached the front line, they were still quite a distance away from the actual battlefield. They were only really close to it now. The soldiers sitting here now weren't the 30,000 soldiers of the Grey Coat Army. There were only 5,000 soldiers here. 2,000 from the Grey Coat Army and 3,000 regular soldiers. The reason for this situation was simple. The Brand military couldn't possibly let the Grey Coat Army enter the battlefield as a whole. So, when they set off, except for General Daniel who led 10,000 soldiers, the rest of the soldiers were scattered. 1,000 or 2,000 soldiers were sent to various war zones. This arrangement was normal, and General Daniel had expected it, so he didn't interfere with the Brand military's random allocation. Tang En and Grey Space were in Frey's Lance Destroyer Battalion. After receiving the order, they headed to the destination together with 1 and 2 battalions of the Grey Coat Army, as well as about a division of Brand soldiers. Titan's Big Sword Battalion was going to another war zone, so they could only wish each other well before parting ways. Since they were now on the road with the Brand soldiers, it was inevitable that they would provoke and ridicule each other. David and Luke were talking about the regular Brand soldiers on the other side of the road. It had to be said that apart from historical grudges, the Brand soldiers had an almost natural sense of superiority when faced with the Grey Coat Army soldiers. This sense of superiority naturally made David and the others very unhappy. They couldn't wait to find a sack to cover the other party, drag him to a hidden corner, and beat up that mocking face. Well, that was actually what they wanted to do, but Fry stopped them. As for Luke's flashy title of Grey Marquis Arrow, it had been given to him by someone after he had shot the bullseye 200 meters away. Then, it had spread like wildfire among the soldiers of the Grey Coat Army. Originally, this title should have stopped at this point, but unexpectedly, a few days later, when the Grey Coat Army soldiers were training in the training area, a few Brand soldiers and some low-ranking officers came to challenge them. Thinking of making the Grey Coat Army proud, Luke gladly accepted. This time, the onlookers weren't almost all Grey Coat Army soldiers like last time. Many Brand soldiers also came over to cheer for their comrade. In the end, Luke shot 3 arrows in a row and easily hit the bullseye 150 meters away, shocking everyone. After this battle, the title of Grey Coat Arrow Marquis quickly spread among the Brand soldiers. It was a sure thing, but Luke didn't seem to like this title at all. Whoever mentioned it in front of him would fall out with him on the spot. But in Tangen's opinion, Luke probably just wasn't used to it, and might even be a little shy. He would naturally accept it in the future. After all, this was a great honor, wasn't it? After lunch and a short rest, the team set off again. If nothing unexpected happened, they would reach their destination, Parso checkpoint, tonight. But about half an hour later, the Brand soldiers in front suddenly became restless. It wasn't very obvious, but it was obvious. What's going on? Tangen subconsciously turned to ask Fry. Although Fry hadn't been to the front line for more than 10 years, he was still very familiar with the situation here. After all, he had been here for more than 10 years. It's blocked. I can't see clearly. Well, I think I saw something. Fry looked around and shook his head. Wait a moment. We should be able to see it soon. The Brand soldiers in front slowed down. The atmosphere was very solemn. After a few more minutes, they finally stopped. At this time, the gray coat army soldiers also saw the situation clearly. They stopped, and the scene became unusually solemn in an instant. Not far away on the right side of the official road, there was a farm with black smoke rising in spirals. Above it, a few vulture-like birds were circling. Maybe they couldn't see anything else clearly, but the bloody corpse hanging at the corner of the church and fluttering in the wind undoubtedly said something. F***ck. Luke, who had the sharpest eyes, seemed to have noticed something. He clenched his fists, and his face was a little distorted. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's just a F***king child." Tang Yan's expression changed slightly when he heard that. The cold wind in the north was everywhere, but it was definitely impossible for it to blow an adult up. If that was the case, the one hanging there could only be a child. An officer with an ugly expression walked over from the brand soldiers in front. After exchanging a few words with the commander of the Gray Coat Army, the team turned around and walked toward the village on the side of the road. The distance wasn't far to begin with. After a few steps, the brand soldiers in front suddenly made a racket, and all kinds of angry curses rang out in low voices. Then, the expressions of the Gray Coat Army soldiers changed, and the veins on the arms holding their spears bulged. The bloody corpse floating at the corner of the church was actually a little girl who wasn't even 3 feet tall. Under her flaxen hair, her palm-sized head leaned weakly to one side. Her face was extremely ferocious, and her eyes were empty. The lively brown or sky-blue eyes that should have been inside her eyes had disappeared, and she just looked down blankly as her body swayed. It wasn't just that part that had disappeared. The skin below the little girl's neck had also disappeared. Caw, caw, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Before the bird's cry faded away, the sound of bowstrings rang out, and 3 black arrows shot out at high speed, accurately hitting the heads of the 3 vultures that were swooping down from above. The birds' corpses fell down and landed on the roof of a tiled house, before they rolled down and disappeared from sight. After doing all that, Luke put away the flying eagle bow with a livid expression. The team entered the farm in a heavy atmosphere. Despite the cold wind, the smell of blood still assailed their nostrils. As expected, all they saw were corpses that were too horrible to look at. Everyone put down the little girl's body and found a white cloth to cover it. Then, they silently collected all kinds of corpses and placed them in the open space on the west side of the village. After gathering all the corpses, everyone's expressions turned even uglier. Apart from the little girl, there wasn't a single complete corpse here. Some of them even seemed to have been torn apart by an external force and couldn't be pieced back together. As soldiers, their mental fortitude was naturally strong, and none of them vomited. But this didn't mean that they weren't disgusted or angry. Take the gray space for example. They had experienced countless battles, big and small, and had seen corpses piled up into mountains. They had also killed many people with their own hand. However, they had never targeted innocent civilians, let alone used such cruel means. The grave had been dug. Everyone was silent for a few minutes before they put the corpses in one by one. After checking a few corpses, Fry stood up and took a deep breath. The barbarians did this. Barbarians? Tang Yan frowned even though he had expected this when he saw the torn corpses. Isn't this the area controlled by the Bran? How can there be barbarians here? Fry shook his head and said in a low voice, "The defensive line can block groups of barbarians, but there will always be gaps and a few barbarians will break in. After these barbarians enter, they will often be cruel because they know that they can't go back." He paused and pointed at the farm in front of them. A farm like this only needs 5 barbarians to slaughter it. Barbarians? Me. F***k. You. Motherf***ker. David took a few deep breaths. His chest heaved up and down, and he clenched his teeth so hard that they almost broke. He was full of anger. Tang Yan patted David's shoulder and continued to frown. "I don't understand. The war has been going on for so long. Why don't these civilians leave here and retreat to the rear? This is more complicated. Fry stepped back and let the soldiers move the corpses in front of them. Some will leave, but there will still be some who choose to stay. Some of them are single old people. They don't have much time left. They don't want to die on the road and would rather die in their hometown. Most of them can't afford to move. They need food, water, and shelter wherever they go. But the city doesn't allow them to enter. They can't even become homeless beggars. If they leave their homes and land, they have nothing. Alas, this situation is very common. Not to mention that this is still within the controlled area. Even outside, there are many farms that haven't been evacuated. Of course, they have some ability to protect themselves. Sometimes they hide in the mountains and forests, but they can't go far. They have to come back to take care of the harvest. It's very dangerous, but there's no other way. When I was in the army, sometimes I would go and help. Many soldiers did this. But often, when we go this time, the farm is still there. But the next time we go, it's in ruins. Fry finished with a sigh. The wrinkles on his face gathered into a gully. He looked sad and helpless. Tang En nodded silently. While they were talking, the grave was already buried. This was destined to be an unmarked grave. No one knew who they were, not even the name of the farm. In the distance, Michaud came closer and shook his head. "Boss, we found traces. There are about 10 of them, but they disappeared in the mountains east of the village. We can't find them in a short time. The barbarians are used to hunting. They are very good at hiding and tracking." Fry licked his dry lips and said, "Tang En, I know you are good at tracking, but not now. Well, they can't get out of here. They will be caught and killed sooner or later." This was a fact. Now they were in the army. They had military orders. They could come and bury the bodies, but they couldn't go into the mountains to kill the barbarians. After all, the military situation was like fire. No one knew if the defense line was broken because they didn't arrive in time. It was cruel, but it was also very real. "Boss, give me half a day." "Shut up." Tang En looked at David calmly. David pursed his lips and lowered his head. Then he nodded to Fry. "Well, let's go." Chapter 466. After burying the innocent victims of the unknown farm, the troop did not pursue the barbarians. Instead, they chose to continue on their journey. Everyone knew that there was no right or wrong in doing so. Of course, the atmosphere in the troop was inevitably oppressive. Especially in the following journey, they found 2 more tragic scenes. One was on the side of the road. Many corpses were lying in the weeds. Judging from their clothing, they seemed to belong to a small merchant group. Clothes, blankets, and other goods were scattered on the ground. Food and wine barrels were taken away. The other was at the foot of the mountain. It was discovered by the scouts. This group of people were commoners. There were men and women, old people and children. Looking at the direction of the corpses, they seemed to have wanted to retreat into the mountains. However, they were hit and slaughtered. Not a single one was left alive. The method was still cruel. The corpses were torn apart. Needless to say, it was the barbarians again. After burying the corpses, the troop continued to move forward. Most of the soldiers had a gloomy expression. Even though they had not set foot on the battlefield yet, the unique cruelty of the battlefield still shrouded them. Of course, their hatred for the barbarians was also completely aroused. In the evening, the troop arrived at the Paso checkpoint. After a series of procedures, the troop successfully stepped into the checkpoint. Although it was evening, there were bonfires in the checkpoint. The main road area was as bright as day. The interior area was not big, but the military equipment on and off the city walls were packed. Basically, except for heavy weapons like the Hammer of Thunder, there was no lack of crossbows. The checkpoint was purely a military building. Other than the armored soldiers walking around, there were basically no commoners in plain clothes. It was already late at night. Tang En and the others were naturally brought into the barrack. However, halfway through the journey, The brand soldiers in front quickly moved to the side. Then, the gray coat army soldiers also retreated to the side of the road. Move aside, move aside. I'm talking to you. Get the F***ck out of my way. The brand soldiers probably knew what was going on, so they automatically moved aside. The gray coat army soldiers were a little confused. They retreated a little slower, so they were immediately greeted with violent curses. Then, dozens of soldiers covered in blood rushed past him. Many of them carried dying soldiers on their backs and simple stretchers in their hands. So arrogant. Brother Fry, what's his background? David curled his lips and turned his head to ask. Shoo! Frey's expression was a little serious. He immediately put a finger to his mouth to signal for her to be quiet. After watching the other party completely pass through the line, he put away his solemn expression and sighed. Brother David, if you have any doubts in the future, you can ask in a low voice. If the other party heard you just now, it would be an unavoidable conflict. Got it. David touched his hair embarrassedly and then asked tentatively, Are they, very powerful? I don't know if they're powerful or not, but they're definitely not as powerful as you. But they're wounded soldiers who just retreated from the battlefield. Frey's tone was a little heavy. He looked a little melancholy. Did you see the leader just now? Yes, that's the one who scolded. The brand's battalion commander rank was pinned to his sleeve. That means that he has at least 300 soldiers under him. But we saw just now, including the wounded soldiers being carried, there are less than 100. After a pause, he continued, The barbarians are ferocious. Ordinary soldiers can only use their numbers and lives to fight against them. So after every battle, there are many wounded. Of course, they have to be treated. The best and fastest way to treat them is the priests of the Temple of Light. But they usually only follow large armies. For an inconspicuous checkpoint like this, where there's no guarantee of survival, they naturally won't come, haha. At this point, Frey's lips curled into a faint mocking smile. He shook his head and continued, The soldiers here have to rely on themselves for minor injuries and rely on the military doctor for serious injuries. Yes, the standard of the military doctor is higher, but it's not easy to treat serious injuries in the hands of the barbarians. If they're sent here in time and if they're tough, they might be able to save their lives. But if they're too slow, it's hard to say. So when you encounter these wounded soldiers who are rushing to the military doctor's treatment center, you have to make way for them no matter what, because it's very likely that it's the last chance of survival for more than 10 soldiers. Fry sighed lightly. Perhaps he had seen this kind of scene many times. His expression didn't change, but his tone was a little sad. David heard this and his face gradually became serious. He finally nodded heavily. I understand, Brother Fry. Although the Grey Coat Army and the Brand nobles were working together now, there was still some hatred in their hearts, especially between the low-level soldiers who actually fought against each other. But now they had a common enemy, the barbarians in the northern wilderness. That was why they were working together. But since they were already working together, even if they didn't expect to help each other on the battlefield, they definitely couldn't block each other's way of survival. Otherwise, no one could guarantee that they wouldn't be the one lying on the stretcher one day. After seeing this scene, the Grey Coat Army soldiers had a clear understanding of the barbarians after half a day of intense anger. Even if the soldiers in the camp weren't the elites of the 3 major legions, their combat power wouldn't be too low. But now they were in such a state. How could they not be shocked? After that, there were no more incidents, and the troops smoothly made their way to the camp. Although it was called a camp, it was actually a spacious room similar to a warehouse. There were rows of simple bedding and bedding inside. It was a bit like what Tang En and the others saw in the mines. But after all, it was a military camp. In order to prevent the spread of plagues and other diseases, the hygiene was pretty good. There weren't many smells. In fact, if it was a large city, the military camp inside would arrange rooms according to the organization of each troop. But there were no such conditions here, so a portion of the Grey Coat Army soldiers lived together with the Brand soldiers for the first time. Of course, in order to prevent any problems, the officers from both sides also lived here to suppress them. And because they were vaguely worried that they would be at a disadvantage if there was a conflict, the officers brought in the elite soldiers. Fry, who had a good reputation in the Grey Coat Army, naturally bore the brunt of the attack. Before entering the room, a small matter happened. It was in that room that a person who seemed to be a logistics officer was holding a list of names. The logistics soldiers inside the room carried some bedding to the side and then covered it with the bedding that was brought in later. Some of the soldiers who were already in the room sat on the bed. Some were making their own expressions, and some were indifferently watching this scene. Hee, this is quite hygienic. A young soldier glanced inside from the window and turned his head to casually say. As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere changed. Almost all the Brand soldiers around him looked over. Their expressions were somewhat angry, and the impatient ones were already restless. Pa! Sorry, I'm new. I haven't been to the front line before. Sorry. The thin man reacted quickly and slapped the young soldier on the back of the head. He then spread his hands in a sincere tone. The Brand soldiers finally snorted and turned their heads away. What rule did we break this time? David leaned close to Fry and asked in a low voice. Tang En and the others also looked over. To be honest, they were thinking the same thing as the young soldier, but they didn't say it out loud. Well, hygiene is only one of the reasons why we changed the bedding. Frey's mouth was a little bitter as he said, the places where the bedding was removed mean that the soldiers who slept there were already dead. Luke nodded thoughtfully. Is it because of taboos? Luke shook his head. No. Which soldier hasn't killed a few people? If there's a taboo, it's only the living. Fry pointed at another logistics officer who was in charge of the statistics and said, well, the soldiers are paid every 6 months. If they're lucky, they'll get some extra income like rewards. Naturally, it's not safe to keep the money on them when they go to war. Generally, they collect some and send it back home. The families of the Grey Coat Army soldiers are basically at the base, so there's no problem. But these Brand soldiers can only keep the money under their bedding. That's what this officer is doing right now. Fry lowered his voice slightly. Of course, if they send it back, they might keep some of it, but it won't be too much. They can at least send some of it back. Nodding in understanding, Tang En and the others looked at each other with mixed feelings. Fortunately, Fry was on their side. Otherwise, who knew how many hidden bombs they would have to step on? At that time, let alone fighting the barbarians or taking revenge on Sessman, the conflict with the Brand soldiers would be enough to deal with. David scratched his head. Brother Fry, if there's anything else we need to pay attention to, just tell us. Otherwise, I'm really worried that we'll accidentally step on another one. I'm not afraid of fighting, but this kind of inexplicable conflict, in the end, it'll be a little troublesome if it's our own side that's in the wrong. Fry shrugged. That's about it. I can't remember anything in this short period of time. Well, when you meet them, just ask me directly. Okay. After the logistics soldiers packed up, everyone filed into the room. The beds were all arranged, so there was no difference. Naturally, there wouldn't be any conflict. Since they were in someone else's territory, there were some things that needed to be communicated and agreed upon. There were 2,000 people from the Grey Coat Army this time, including 1 regiment commander and 3 battalion commanders. After confirming the beds, Fry and the others went to the checkpoint command center under the guidance of the messenger. Tang En was also a regiment commander, but he wasn't part of the military system, so he declined the invitation. Perhaps it was because of the impending war. No matter if it was the Brand soldiers or the Grey Coat Army, they weren't in the mood to provoke each other. Listening to the sound of armor colliding from the patrolling soldiers outside the window, and the long howl that sounded like both a human voice and the wind, everyone gradually closed their eyes. It was a silent night. Chapter 467. The next morning, they left the Parso checkpoint early in the morning. The 300 or so people rushed into the wilderness. The monotonous sky was bleak, but when they looked up, they were like goshawks flying in the sky. It was an extremely magnificent scene. They looked down and into the distance. The low hills spiraled endlessly, as if they were unwilling to stop until the end of the sky. So King fast. I thought we would at least rest for 2 days to get used to it. This is great. We just arrived last night and they sent us out this morning. Do they really want us to die? David stretched and looked around as he curled his lips. David couldn't be blamed for making such malicious conjectures. Just as he said, they had just gotten up this morning and hadn't even had the time to walk around the checkpoint when they received the order to go out to battle. They were to rush to a high ground with the fastest speed possible, where a brand heavy sword battalion was trapped. That might be the case, but it shouldn't be the case. Fry smiled bitterly and continued, I went to look at the marching map last night. As expected, we are now at the edge of the lawless zone. However, the situation here is indeed tense. The northern wilderness already has most of the initiative, and signs of barbarian activity are becoming more and more rampant. I reckon that there will be big movements soon, and that checkpoint won't be defended for long. After a pause, he continued, besides, didn't the brand send out a lot of soldiers this morning? If it wasn't for the fact that they couldn't find suitable people, do you think they would be willing to let the Grey Coat Army rescue them? So they don't believe us. David punched his palm and waved angrily. Fine, why don't we just walk around and go back and say that we didn't find the place? On the side, Luke shook his head. Forget it. We've come so far, and since we're already here, we should at least see what the barbarians look like. Luke has a point. Fry nodded with a smile. We'll have to fight the barbarians sooner or later. It's good to get a feel of it now. Well, the barbarians are not only terrifying in terms of fighting strength. Their strength is definitely not as high as yours, but what you need to pay attention to is their decisiveness in carrying out orders to the letter, as well as their frenzied state during a real battle. Ordinary barbarians are basically all brawn and no brains. But that's what makes them so terrifying. Sometimes, only the commander needs to have intelligence. Tang En raised his eyebrows and nodded. Although they had a good personal relationship, the Gray Space was not Frey's team after all, so he couldn't say too much. However, Tang En also understood that Fry was worried that they would underestimate the enemy and end up in a passive situation. One had to know that this was a battlefield. Here, strength was not the only criterion for survival. Sometimes, people with higher strength would die faster. This was not a lie, because the stronger a person was, the more they liked to rely on their own strength to change the situation. Although this was simple and direct, the result was often to attract more enemies, fall into a state of being surrounded, and finally die of exhaustion. As for Frey's last sentence, it should have been directed at him. The Gray Space had joined Spear Break's camp, but in the end, they were still Tang En's men. If there were any conflicts, David and the others would definitely listen to him, not Fry. This was often the most fatal point, because many facts had already been made clear. Soldiers only needed to be given orders and then carry them out. As for tactics and other things, it was best to leave it to the commander. If there were smart people among the soldiers, they would question the tactics. One had to know that thinking too much was one of the signs of a smart person, and the result was that they were not decisive in carrying out orders. The consequences of this might not be serious in other places, but on the battlefield, it was very likely to change the situation and affect the lives of hundreds of people. Fry had to pay attention to this. After thinking for a while, Tang En said seriously, "Brother Fry, you have been on the battlefield for many years and have a lot of experience. If nothing special happens, we will naturally listen to you." This was not a lie. Before they found Sessman's position, Tang En and the others could only stay in Spear Break's camp. This was a battlefield, not a place where they could wander around. Since they had to stay here, the command naturally had to be given to Fry. It was important to know one's own limits. Tang En was an assassin, not a general. He was good at precise control of small situations. He really did not know how to command the army to make all kinds of tactical orders. Fry heard this and felt relieved. He knew that Tang En had understood what he meant. Then, he could not help but be overjoyed. After all, with a team like the Gray Space by his side, whether it was the mission success rate or the survival rate of the soldiers, it would undoubtedly increase greatly. Just like now, with the members of the Gray Space scouting the way, he felt an unprecedented sense of security when he walked on the battlefield for the first time. As for the special reason, Fry could also think of it. Tang En had joked about coming to the front line to kill someone he did not like. It should be because of this. This did not conflict with their mission. Obviously, that person had not appeared yet. He waved his hand and laughed. Haha, I was just lucky to not die after a few years of fighting. The so-called rich experience is actually obtained after a few battles. Excessive modesty is arrogance. I really couldn't tell that Brother Fry was such a person. Haha. After joking, Tang En immediately changed the topic and asked, "What do we do when we reach the destination?" Tang Yu. Fry shook his head and lost the opportunity to refute. He could only smile bitterly and said, "The first thing we have to do is to observe. If we find that the battle has ended or there are many barbarians, we will go back the way we came. Of course, if we happen to meet the barbarians who are full of scars, we still have to take advantage of them. Well, if the brand soldiers are still alive, then we will save them to build a good relationship. In short, our principle is that we can save them, but we can't put ourselves in danger." Tang En nodded and was about to answer, but someone else spoke first. "How treacherous! It turns out that time can really change people." Turning around, Skinny Monkey-like sighed. "I can't believe that Captain Fry, who was willing to sacrifice himself for his allies, has become such a person today. Damn. So you are teaming up to make fun of me today." Frey's face darkened and he couldn't help but curse. He rolled up his sleeves and was about to beat up Skinny Monkey-like Tang En, but he had no problem dealing with Skinny Monkey-like. "Oh no, they are going to kill me. Brother Tang En, for the sake of our life and death experience, come and help me. You are looking for death." At this moment, Fry stopped and suddenly turned his head to look at the two people who were running down the hill quickly. They were their scouts, and the members of the Gray Space took the initiative to act as scouts. He raised his right hand and said, "Stop." As soon as the team stopped by the roadside, the two people had already rushed in front of them. They were the second batch of members of the Gray Space, Michaud's subordinate. They didn't dare to delay and went straight to Tang En, but halfway through, they saw Tang En's hand gesture and turned to Fry. "Sir Fry, the destination is in front of us, and the two sides are currently fighting." "Okay." Fry nodded and then said to Tang En, "Let's go and have a look together." Fry saw Tang En's hand gesture just now, but even if he didn't do that, with their friendship, Fry couldn't ignore Tang En. Tang En shrugged his shoulders and naturally agreed to it indifferently. Then Tang En took David, Michaud, and Luke with sharp eyes. Fry took Skinny Monkey-like and a few of his old buddies, and climbed up the slope to the top of the hill. At this time, they could vaguely hear the sound of fighting. About 200 meters ahead, there was the tallest hill in the area. Of course, this height was relative to the low hills around it. The slope on both sides of the hill was slightly gentle and steep. On the gentle slope, the most simple fortifications had been built with logs and trenches. The soldiers wearing the brand's standard armor were fighting fiercely with the attackers. As for the attackers, naturally, they were the barbarians of the northern wilderness. This was the first time that Tang En and the others had seen real barbarian soldiers. The Serpentis Guard before was a little special and not representative. Simple animal skins covered their majestic bodies, and some of them were not fully clothed, but their black hair was very long, like an animal's second layer of warmth. There were all kinds of weapons in their hands, such as huge swords, thick iron rods, and so on. The only thing they had in common was that they were all big and powerful. Although they were a little far away, because of the tailwind, they could hear the barbarians roaring like giant beasts when they attacked. It was quite terrifying. The current situation could be said to be very unfavorable for the Bran. Although they had the advantage of the high ground and had the support of the simple fortifications, the barbarians' attack power was astonishing. In a one-on-one battle, the Bran soldiers could barely resist a few attacks. Only by besieging the barbarians could they possibly force the barbarians to retreat. But this situation obviously couldn't last for long. According to the intelligence, more than half of the heavy sword battalion's strength had been killed. Only about 150 people were still able to fight, and most of them were injured. Although there were only 50 to 60 barbarians, they had the upper hand on the battlefield. They were forcing Bulan's soldiers to retreat again and again. If the barbarians retreated another 20 meters and reached the top of the hill, the battle would be over. TSK, this is an encounter. It seems that our allies aren't very lucky. Smacking his lips, Skinny Monkey gloated. They were all veterans of the battlefield. After a little observation, they could conclude that the Bran's heavy sword battalion had accidentally encountered the barbarians. They couldn't get rid of them and could only choose to defend here and wait for reinforcements. Look over there. Luke suddenly pointed at the depression below the slope of the hill. Everyone turned their gazes and couldn't help but inwardly suck in a breath of cold air. There were about 100 barbarians guarding there. Some were bandaging their wounds, while the rest were looking up at the fierce battle on the hill. Are they trying to wipe out the Bran soldiers at the smallest cost? Another one of Frey's brothers, Bamboo Pole, said in astonishment. He then scratched his head and said, F***ck, I haven't seen them for more than 10 years. These barbarians are getting smarter. They even know how to scheme. The situation was very clear. The slope was only so big. 50 or 60 barbarians were enough. More barbarians wouldn't make much of a difference. Therefore, the barbarians took turns attacking the high ground to minimize the casualties. This was just like the saying, barbarians weren't scary. What was scary was a barbarian's culture. What do you think, Brother Fry? Do you want to make a move? David turned his head and asked. The current situation wasn't very clear. If they waited for half an hour, the Bran soldiers would definitely die. 150 barbarians. Fry murmured. After pondering for a moment, he decisively punched his palm and said, Damn it, let's do it. Chapter 468. The fierce battle was still going on. On the tens of meters of slope leading to the peak of the mountain, the ground was soaked in dark red blood. Gradually stiffening corpses were scattered on the ground. Most of them were Bran soldiers. Some of them had sunken chests. They hadn't died yet. From time to time they would twitch. Then, in their lifeless eyes, they would see a big iron stick smashing down, bang. A kick landed on the side of the barbarian's waist. His exhausted body couldn't help but take a few steps back. The heavy sword was stabbed into the ground. He barely managed to stabilize his staggering body. Although this burly man with the battalion commander rank of Bran's battalion commander on his sleeve was still full of killing intent, he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. His body was covered in wounds and blood. He was on the verge of collapsing. Roar! Not far away, a barbarian saw a big opportunity. He immediately roared and threw away his opponent. He waved his heavy sword and rushed over. Ordinary barbarians weren't smart. However, they recognized the Bran's military rank. They knew that killing a commander was more meritorious than killing a soldier. Clang! Sparks flew everywhere. The heavy sword that was barely able to parry fell instantly and cut into the kneeling battalion commander's own shoulder armor. It was deeply embedded into the armor. White bones could be seen. Blood spurted out again. Die, the barbarian said vaguely. He excitedly raised his heavy sword again. However, just as it was about to fall, his body shook. Puff! The left side of his chest was pierced through by the heavy sword. Idiot, your opponent is me. Clang! The heavy sword fell to the ground. With a bang, the unwilling barbarian was kicked away by his previous opponent, a young soldier. He rolled down the slope. Battalion commander. The young soldier stretched out his hand and pulled the burly man up. His face was pale. The attack just now wasn't easy for him. Are you okay? I'm fine. Yes. With a muffled groan, the battalion commander pulled out the heavy sword embedded in his shoulder. He patted the young soldier's shoulder and grinned. Ross, well done. Hee, that barbarian was too greedy. The young soldier named Ross scratched his head and smiled shyly. Then, he supported the battalion commander and took a few steps back. He asked, should we retreat? No. Huff. The battalion commander replied without hesitation. Gasping for breath, he looked around at the battle situation. The soldiers under his command were almost unable to hold on any longer. This line of defense was in imminent danger. Pass down my order. Have the reserves at the back advance. Subconsciously, he looked back. A dozen meters away on the mountain peak, there were soldiers who were taking the opportunity to rest. There weren't many of them, only about 20 of them, and all of them were injured. Although they were called reserves, they were actually injured soldiers who had retired from the army before. But now was not the time to hesitate. Ross nodded, got up, and was about to run back when he paused. His expression was a little hesitant. In the end, he turned around and asked, Battalion Commander, will the reinforcements come? Yes, definitely. Hurry up and go. The battalion commander waved his hand resolutely. Yes. But the premise is that we can hold on until then. Seeing the young soldier run back with joy, the burly man put down his arm and smiled bitterly. Time was too tight. They had encountered this group of barbarians last night. After quickly judging that they couldn't get rid of them, he immediately sent some soldiers back to ask for help. Then, he took advantage of the terrain to buy some time. But, even if the soldiers reached the checkpoint safely, the distance between them and the barbarians would take a long time. To be honest, he didn't have the slightest confidence that the reinforcements would arrive in time. But, he was the battalion commander. Even if the army was in a desperate situation, he couldn't let his soldiers lose their confidence. The 20 or so injured soldiers quickly returned to the battle. The front line was stabilized again. But, everyone knew that this was only temporary. Moreover, if they fell into a passive situation again, they wouldn't even be able to return to the mountain peak. Their lives would come to an end. Even so, the battalion commander's decision to not retreat and send out the remaining soldiers was correct. There were no more fortifications behind them. If they didn't fight for the last time and returned to the mountain peak, it would turn into a one-sided massacre. If that was the case, it would be better to kill a few more barbarians here. He looked in the direction of the checkpoint again. It was still a continuous stretch of hills without any traces of people. Phew! The burly man took a deep breath, and the taste of blood went straight to his throat. He tightened his grip on the heavy sword in his hand. The disappointment in his eyes receded, and he regained his sharpness and determination. I can't retreat anymore. If that's the case, I'll fight to the death here today. He raised his heavy sword, stepped forward, and roared, Kill! An earth-shattering roar suddenly sounded from behind him. It wasn't me who shouted. The burly man opened his mouth. He was stunned for a moment. Then, more than 10 figures jumped out from beside him. They were dressed in black armor, with large swords, short blades, and so on. There were all kinds of weapons. Then, soldiers wearing different kinds of armor and holding spears rushed out. What's going on? Reinforcements are here. Reinforcements are here. the young soldier from before hadn't found a suitable opportunity to attack. He had been wandering around the edge of the battle. So, he was the first to notice this group of heavenly soldiers. His heart skipped a beat. Then, when he saw that it was armor and not beast skin, he immediately cheered. "Reinforcements are here." These words were more effective than any recovery magic. The exhausted soldiers of Buran were overjoyed when they heard this. It was as if a warm current of energy had been injected into their bodies. Their feeble heavy swords were immediately swung like a gust of wind. Before the reinforcements could join the battle, the barbarians were already forced to retreat. Needless to say, these reinforcements were naturally from the Grey Space and Frey's spears. The reason why they came from behind was that although the slope behind the hill was steep and not suitable for fighting, climbing wasn't a big problem if there was no interference. The second reason was that there was a wide field of vision. There wasn't a good opportunity to attack the barbarians, so it was better to save this group of brand soldiers first. Because of the sudden appearance, these 50 to 60 barbarians were caught off guard. In addition, Frey's side was full of fresh soldiers. They thrust their spears and the barbarians had no choice but to retreat. The 100 or so barbarians at the foot of the hill finally came back to their senses. They quickly roared and rushed up to help. Halfway up the hill, all the forces of both sides came into contact for the first time. Because there was no plan in advance, the battlefield couldn't be used. After a chaotic battle, there were casualties on both sides. In general, Frey's side had a slight advantage. The barbarians saw that the situation wasn't good, so they didn't attack. After leaving behind more than 10 corpses, they slowly retreated to the foot of the hill. When the barbarians retreated, the Grey Coat army didn't chase after them. After a short fight, they had personally experienced the strength of the barbarians. Although they weren't afraid, they had to admit that the barbarians were strong. This wasn't an opponent that could be defeated by taking advantage of the situation. Using force would only cause unnecessary casualties. Bang, bang, bang. Seeing the barbarians retreat to the foot of the hill, the last force supporting the brand soldiers disappeared. They sat down on the ground, panting heavily. Halfway up the hill, it was as if several bellows had appeared in an instant. "Haha, my heavy sword battalion! Thank you, thank you. May I ask where your commanding officer is?" Amidst the laughter, the burly man found Fry. He looked at Frey's armor and the insignia on his sleeve with some doubt. Then, he raised his hand and saluted. "Thank you for your support. Yes, Heavy Sword Battalion of the Thunder Battalion, Eltek." Probably because he heard the name of the Thunderbolt's army, Fry smiled and saluted back. Brand's new Grey Coat army, Long Spear Battalion, Fry. Grey Coat army. There was a brief moment of silence, and the sounds of heavy breathing in the surroundings also quieted down. Escaping from death was, of course, something worthy of ecstasy. But after knowing that it was their former enemy, the Grey Coat army, who had saved them, these brand soldiers couldn't help but feel complicated and awkward. "Oh, so it's the brothers from the Grey Coat army." After a while, Eltek, the commander of the brand battalion, reacted. His expression was a little strange, but he still smiled and said, "I heard that you were coming over a few days ago." Before he could finish, he was interrupted by a suppressed, angry voice. It was the young soldier named Ross. "You are the Grey Coat army?" Fry was slightly stunned. He looked at Eltek and asked, "This little brother is? You are the Grey Coat army?" The heavy sword trembled. His tone was even more aggressive, as if he had already confirmed it. The surrounding Grey Coat army soldiers frowned and approached. They were also a little angry. Originally, they came to rescue them out of kindness, but now they were questioned by the person they saved. What the hell was this? Ross, calm down. Without them, we would already be dead. Eltek shouted. Seeing that the young soldier's face was red, but still stubborn, Eltek shook his head helplessly and waved his hand. "Come, drag him to the side first." A few brand soldiers forcefully dragged Ross away and whispered something to him. Eltek spread out his hands apologetically. Sorry, his brother, yes, died in the battle with you. I don't mean anything else. I represent the entire battalion to thank you for coming to rescue them. Eltek's tone was quite sincere, which made the soldiers on Frey's side feel a little better. Although he didn't necessarily have a good impression of the Greycoat Army, as mentioned earlier, they were saved because of them. The necessary gratitude was still necessary. Even so, the awkwardness in the atmosphere had inevitably cooled down. After a few words, Eltek wanted to check on the casualties and organize the soldiers that could fight, so he politely said goodbye. Although Frey had expected this to happen, as the rescuers, they didn't get the respect they deserved. He was quite depressed, so he nodded and left. Damn it. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have saved these ingrates. Spitting on the ground, David said angrily as he looked at the brand soldiers who separated themselves from them. We have to take the first step. It's just a good karma. It doesn't matter. And I already said that they are ingrate. Why should we care about them? Casually answering, Tang En wasn't interested in these disputes. His gaze was fixed on the barbarians at the foot of the mountain. He was thinking about a problem. Barbarians should be considered as humans, right? Would there be blood energy if they were killed? Chapter 469. When it came to the issue of blood, it was a huge problem. Now that he couldn't find Sessman in a short period of time, Tang En had to stay on the battlefield for a while. To be honest, after killing Eunice and Sang Pu, Tang En had tasted the sweetness of obtaining a huge amount of blood. Now, he really didn't have the desire to kill small fries. But this was a battlefield, and it was impossible not to kill. Since that was the case, Tang En naturally wanted to clarify the profound question of whether the barbarians were humans or not, based on the great principle that no matter how small the mosquito was, it was still meat. Based on past history, if one wanted to obtain blood, the first condition was to kill the barbarians personally. Secondly, the barbarians had to be humans. Alright, this point was yet to be verified. He definitely did not kill chickens or ducks, but he did not know what would happen to some intelligent or humanoid creatures, such as magical beasts such as dragons and so on. Twain had never killed them before, so he did not know. As for the barbarians, from their appearance and living habits, they should be humans. But their long black hair and their tongues that never straightened when they spoke, no matter how he looked at them, they didn't look like they had fully evolved. So it was hard to say whether they were categorized as humans or animals by the system. I'll kill one and see. Rubbing his chin, Tang En casually made up his mind, like a normal person deciding whether to kill a chicken or fish for lunch. The group of barbarians at the foot of the mountain obviously didn't know that they had been targeted by a certain demon. At this moment, they were gathered at the foot of the mountain to monitor the movements here. After a while, they began to line up in formation, as if they were about to attack. This situation was normal. The Spear Destroyer Battalion had a total of 300 people. Although the Brand's Heavy Sword Battalion had more than 100 people, only a third of them could fight. This meant that there were at most 350 soldiers here. If it was only based on numbers, naturally they would be able to defeat the 150 barbarians below. But thinking about what Frey said before, that one barbarian was equivalent to 3 Brand regular soldiers, then the situation would be reversed. Seeing that the barbarians were actively preparing for battle, the people on the mountain couldn't remain calm, mainly on Ert's side. The soldiers on Frey's side, on the other hand, had an eager look on their faces. Of course, in the eyes of the former, the latter's state was the same as courting death. Although there were 2 factions on the mountain, whether they liked it or not, the situation was stronger than the people. The Brand Heavy Sword Battalion, which was about to be crippled, naturally had to be led by the Greycoat Army. Eltek reported the number of soldiers who could still fight to Frey, and then suggested in a negotiating tone that the 300 men should follow the previous strategy and fight a defensive battle based on the simple earth and wood fortifications. It should be said that this suggestion was quite reliable. Although they had new reinforcements, the overall strength of the barbarians was still superior. Their advantage was that their stamina was still intact, and they were all fresh troops. On the other hand, the barbarians had been fighting for half a day, and could be considered as a tired army. As long as they persevered in this war of attrition, their chances of victory would be quite high. But this suggestion was tactfully rejected by Fry. A defensive battle? What a joke! Not to mention that his long spear destroyer formation was famous for its offense, and was not good at defense. Moreover, with such a strong team like the Grey Coat Army, fighting a defensive battle would definitely be self-destructive. When Eltek saw this, he thought that it was because Fry had never come into contact with the barbarians and didn't know how powerful they were. They had just escaped from the Grim Reaper's scythe, and didn't want to go through it again. Frey's temper was quite good, and after hearing a few words, he nodded. But after guessing the intentions of the other party, he couldn't help but laugh. He had been on the front lines for more than 10 years, and naturally knew how powerful the barbarians were. To put it bluntly, when he was fighting with the barbarians on the battlefield, Eltek was nowhere to be found. Seeing that the barbarians were about to get into formation, Fry waved his hand and went straight to his own team to set up an arrow formation in front of the fortifications. Eltek was stunned for a moment, and then he cursed under his breath, sighed, and walked back to his soldiers. Seeing the Grey Coat Army soldiers set up an arrow formation in front of the fortifications, the soldiers of the Heavy Sword Battalion were dumbfounded. Ross came forward. Although his expression was still angry, he still couldn't believe it. Battalion commander, are they going to attack? Nonsense. This bunch of ignorant mud guys. Eltek wasn't in a good mood and replied in a bad mood. But seeing that the other party had just saved them, he still kept the bumpkins back. Idiots, who do they think they are, the elites of the Zechen Legion? Ross didn't have a good impression of the Grey Coat Army, so he naturally didn't hold back when he spoke. That's right, they have only won a few battles, and haven't suffered much. Also, do they think they are still fighting with those second-rate reserve soldiers? It's over, it's over. I thought we would be saved this time, but who knew that we would only be saved for a few minutes, damn. Battalion commander, why don't we wait for them to start fighting, then we will retreat. A quick-witted soldier looked at the steep hill behind him. The Grey Coat Army had climbed up from here. He lowered his voice and said, "It's not right, but they were the ones who made the wrong move first. They can't blame us." Bullsh *T. Eltek's eyes widened as he fiercely stared at the soldier. "I would rather die in battle than lose face like this. If you dare to say something like this again, I will beat you to death." "Yes, yes, yes." The soldier shrunk his head and quickly nodded. Ross saw this and asked, "Battalion commander, what should we do now?" "What can we do, Eltek was about to explode again, but he was forcefully suppressed. He took a deep breath and said, "It's useless to say anything now, they might even think that we are cowards. We can only wait for them to suffer losses." After pondering for a while, he said to Ross, "How about this, you take the rest of the brothers and guard the ravine, I will take a few people to attack with them. If the attack fails, yes, it will definitely fail, then I will tell them to retreat and form a defensive formation. I just hope that they don't lose too many people, or else we will really die here." It was not easy for the reinforcements to come, but they were so unreliable. It was no wonder that Eltek was disappointed. "It doesn't matter, we have already died once, at most we will pay them back with our lives." Ross was very optimistic. After he finished speaking, he looked at the large and small wounds on Eltek's body and took a step forward. "Battalion commander, your injuries are too heavy, let me take a few people to attack with them." Shaking his head, Eltek rejected without thinking. "No, don't fight with them. Yes, your rank is not high enough, we cannot let them look down on us. Knowing the battalion commander's personality, Ross knew that it was useless to persuade him, so he hesitated and said, "Battalion commander, why don't you go and talk to them again?" Because of his brother, Ross did not have any good feelings towards the Greycoat army. He hoped that they would be careless and die in the hands of the barbarians. But now that it involved the lives of more than 100 of his comrades, he suppressed his selfishness and advised, "All right, I will go and talk to them again." Shaking his head, Eltek picked a few lightly injured soldiers and walked towards Fry. The barbarians at the foot of the mountain had already formed a simple formation, one that filled the width of the mountain in a row, stacked up layer by layer. This tactic looked very simple, but the terror of the barbarians was not in their tactic. This simple formation was the best way to ensure that they could unleash their crazy fighting strength. It was probably because they saw the aggressive attack formation of the Spear Destroyer formation halfway up the mountain. A slightly shorter but equally strong barbarian was jumping up and down behind all the barbarians. He waved his iron staff and made a lot of noise. It seemed as if he was very angry. Then, all the soldiers pressed forward, as if they wanted to crush them in one breath. Ta, ta, ta. Finally, when everything was in place, the barbarians made all kinds of ferocious expressions and began to climb up the mountain. Up the mountain! Battalion Commander Fry, listen to my advice. The barbarians cannot be faced head-on. Don't believe me? Let me give you an example. Battalion Commander Eltek, I have a question about the barbarians. Go ahead. Are the barbarians human? Should be. Fry had also finished his preparations. His expression was calm and he stood with his spear, as if waiting for something. To his right was Elt, who was muttering to himself in a low voice with a helpless expression. That's right, his advice had failed again. Fry did not listen to him at all. Seeing him come over, Fry only smiled, nodded and thanked him, and then ignored him. Fry and the others obviously knew about the actions of the heavy sword battalion soldiers behind them, but they did not care. They did not plan to rely on these people this time, but purely to train their own troop. When they saw Eltek bring a few soldiers to join them, they were a little surprised, but then they understood the other party's intention to save face. They wanted to laugh, but still nodded and thanked him. All right, let's attack then. Spreading out his hands, Eltek knew that he could not persuade them, so he said anxiously, "But I have a suggestion. Later, and I'm saying this is definitely not because I don't believe in your fighting power. If the attack is blocked and the situation is not good, we will immediately enter the back of the ravine and switch to a defensive position. How about that? Hey, you have to give us an explanation. Battalion Commander Eltek, I still have a question. Sigh. Ask away." Eltek rubbed his forehead in annoyance. He was speechless at the soldier named Tangen standing beside him. Every time he spoke, he would ask a question. If he did not answer, it would be unreasonable. If he answered, the other party's questions were too strange, making it impossible for him to answer. Eltek pointed with his arm. That poor dwarf hiding behind the barbarians is the leader of the barbarians? A poor dwarf? Forget it, at least I've asked a reliable question. Secretly heaving a sigh of relief, Alt nodded and said, "It should be him. From this morning until now, all the barbarians have participated in the attack, except for him." "Oh, thank you." At this moment, Fry suddenly raised his spear. Rise. Whoosh. As soon as he finished speaking, the barbarian soldiers took half a step forward, raised their spears, and bent their bodies slightly like a bow, ready to charge out at any time. Damn it, come on, let's fight again. Eltek quickly cleared his mind of all the messy thoughts, held his heavy sword tightly, and was ready to be the first to charge out when the order was given. Disagreeing with the attack was a tactical disagreement, and the other party would know who was right and who was wrong later. What he needed to do now was to prove that he was not a coward and win back some face for the Brand's heavy sword battalion. Eltek, who was filled with the tragic heroism of sacrificing himself for a good cause, did not immediately charge out, because the soldier named Fry suddenly turned his head at this crucial moment and patted the shoulder of the bow-wielding young man on the left. The young man smiled slightly and nodded lightly. He put an arrow on the black longbow, raised it instantly, aimed, and released the bowstring. Whoosh! The arrow was like a meteor that streaked across the empty space in the middle of the hill, quickly passing through the heads of the barbarians who could not react in time, and hit the forehead of a short barbarian who had jumped up from behind. Bang! Blood blossomed as the arrow went straight in. The arrow did not slow down, and flew back with the short body, all the way to the foot of the hill. The battlefield was silent, and then the barbarians raised their spears. Kill! Kill, kill, kill! Chapter 470. At noon, the hillside that had been filled with war cries for half a day finally returned to silence. Going all the way down the hillside, the dark red ground was once again baptized by blood. Occasionally, there would be a few white wildflowers crushed in the dust and dyed red. In addition to the stiff soldiers wearing standard armor, there were also many corpses wearing simple animal skins. The smell of blood was so strong that it attracted many scavenging birds. However, because there were still living people moving around, they could only hover in the air temporarily, and let out anxious long cries from time to time. Those so-called living people were actually soldiers holding long spears. They patrolled around the corpses as if they were cleaning the battlefield. Of course, they were not collecting the seemingly useless animal skins and iron rod. Instead, they were looking for any body that was still twitching and had not breathed yet. Then, they would stab it with their spears. This job was very simple. After that, they just needed to move the corpses. There were only a few corpses that were also holding long spears. So soon, a tall and thin officer who looked like a bamboo pole retreated from the battlefield and looked up at the hill. There were dozens of Brand soldiers standing in the ditch of the fortifications. They were motionless and looked over here in a daze. The tall and thin officer scratched his head and walked to the side of the fortifications where a burly man was also in a daze. He gave a simple military salute and paused, looking a little distressed. What? Battalion commander, I'm Bamboo. It's just a nickname. I'm here to ask, do you need to clean the battlefield? He spread out his hands. If you do, please hurry up. We have a few brothers here who are injured and need to go back to receive treatment as soon as possible. Subconsciously licking his lips, the burly man seemed to wake up from a dream. With a complicated expression, he said, Okay, we need. He made a polite gesture. Oh, go ahead. Wait. The burly man suddenly opened his mouth. Seeing the tall and thin officer turn his head in surprise, he hesitated for a moment and asked, You, Gray Coat Army? Of course. The tall and thin officer was a little surprised by this somewhat nonsensical question. Then, he spread out his hands again. The tall and thin officer's face was a little strange. Could it be that the shock was too big and he was scared silly? Looking at the back of the tall and thin officer, Eltek took a deep breath and suppressed the shock in his heart. What kind of people are they helping? After all, Eltek had been through a lot, so he wouldn't be scared silly. Of course, he was indeed shocked. Based on the previous situation, he believed that even if there were 10 commanders here, 9 of them would adopt the defensive tactics he had mentioned. As for the remaining one, he would either be an ignorant newcomer from the academy or an outstanding and fierce person from the various corps. There was nothing much to say about the former. Every year, there would be a few such idiots on the battlefield, and they would become the laughingstock of everyone. As for the ferocious people, Elt had seen them before. There were countless commanders in various armies, and there would always be a few people with outstanding talents and achievements that made others jealous. Elt had a carefree personality, but he was still quite pragmatic. He knew that the so-called ferocious people all had their own special abilities. Dog shit luck was not something that could be casually stepped on. At the very least, they had to have received the corresponding education and had an extremely high foundation in tactics. However, the Grey Coat Army. To put it bluntly, it was a group of peasants. The probability of a ferocious person appearing was almost negligible. But now, the barbarian corpses all over the ground and the nightmarish battle scenes that kept appearing before Eltek's eyes told him that there was indeed a ferocious person among this group of peasants. When the soldiers from both sides approached and the battle was about to break out, Eltek's thoughts were simple. He wanted to charge out as quickly as possible and see if he could kill a barbarian to earn back his losses. However, a random youth had actually killed the enemy commander with a single arrow. When the soldiers charged out, he just stood there stupidly and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. Killing the enemy commander in battle was a commonly used tactic, and the results were extremely good. Not only would it greatly affect the enemy's morale, it would also directly destroy the enemy's command system, causing their combat strength to plummet. But the key point was that although anyone could think of this, there were very few who could actually do it. During battle, the commander either had to sit in the middle of the army or take the lead. Generally speaking, there were more of the former, and killing them in one fell swoop was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. The latter was relatively rare, but there were still some, especially low-ranking officers. But even if one wanted to kill these fellows who took the lead, it might not be as easy as one imagined. After all, if they dared to do so, they more or less had some skills. The barbarian commander stayed at the rear. Because of his short stature, he kept jumping up and down to observe the situation in front of him. His appearance was somewhat comical and provocative. When Eltek and the others were fighting before, they already had the delightful thought of killing the enemy with a single arrow. In fact, they had indeed done so. After all, although they were from the Heavy Sword Battalion, the scouts still had bows and arrows in their hands. However, there were those tall and strong barbarians blocking in front of him. In addition, this short and small fellow was also quite smart. He would choose a different place to jump every time. In the blink of an eye, no one was able to seize this opportunity. But when the young man from the Grey Coat Army received the order, he easily lifted his bow and released the string, just like he did during archery training. But it was this seemingly careless shot that was extremely fast. It pierced through the barbarian's head and directly killed the short barbarian on the spot. Not to mention Eltek himself, even the barbarians didn't have time to react. Some of them took a few steps forward before inexplicably turning their heads and discovering that their commander had already been sent to the foot of the mountain. Just as they were about to fight, their commander was killed. This sudden situation made even the barbarians a little confused. But Fry seemed to have expected this. As soon as the arrow was released, he gave the order and the Grey Coat Army soldiers charged forward with their long spears. They turned their heads to look and turned pale with fright. While deliberately attacking, they brazenly charged forward. The effect of this was self-evident. The square formation of the barbarians was torn open in an instant. Then, the tip of the Grey Cloak Army's arrow formation broke through the gap. In fact, at this time, Eltek had a brief moment of realization. But in an instant, he was shocked by the situation in front of him. Originally, although they had taken the initiative by surprise, the barbarians were not the brand soldiers. Their will to fight was extremely strong. Even if their commander was killed and their morale was low, their fighting strength was still there. But the reality was not like this. The brand soldiers that broke through were like fierce tigers that came down from the mountain, beating the barbarians until they were forced to retreat. Very quickly, the hole in the formation became bigger and bigger, forming a situation where the barbarians were cut in half. To be honest, Eltek was a little frightened. He even suspected that this group of barbarians in front of him was not the same group of barbarians that had fought with him just now. There was no sign of their fierce momentum at all. But after all, Eltek was a battalion commander. He instantly discovered the key point. First of all, the 10 barbarians at the front of the arrow formation were Fry with a spear, a strong man with a big sword, and the tall and thin officer who came to greet them just now. Their fighting strength was extremely strong. Occasionally, there would be a flash of fighting light. There was almost no one who could withstand their attacks. It was because of their strong breakthrough that the barbarians behind them swarmed in. They were unstoppable. But of course, these 10 barbarians were not enough to determine the outcome of the battle. What shocked Eltek more were the soldiers. They were well trained, and after breaking into the formation, they quickly found their own battle positions. They cooperated with each other well, and their spears were sent out one after another. Their attacks and defenses were as smooth as flowing water, and they were quite organized. They were disciplined, and they completed their respective battle movements to the letter. They were not greedy for merit, and they were fearless. Compared to Fry and the rest who had used their own strength to break through the formation, Eltek, as the battalion commander, was undoubtedly more amazed by the performance of these soldiers. After all, the final outcome of a battle would never be decided by one person, but by the thousands of soldiers who were fighting. If I had such soldiers. After seeing this scene, I believe that any commander would have such thoughts. Eltek was no exception. Compared to when his side was attacked by hundreds of barbarians one after another and had no way of retaliating, Eltek looked at the barbarians in front of him who were still able to cut through them like vegetables. He was envious and envious. "Oh, you're injured. Please, don't say that you're with me when you go out. I can't afford to lose face like this. Boss, it's just a scratch. You still dare to talk back. If you get a scratch this time, you'll be disfigured next time. Believe it or not. Oh, there's also that crazy guy." Eltek's mouth twitched when he saw that Tang En mocking the black-armored soldiers in front of him. He could not help but recall the scene from before. In fact, he was not the only one who did not charge out. This guy called Tang En did not charge out either. He just strolled around the edge of the battle, as if he was observing something. Eltek had thought that the other party was afraid of death and wanted to take advantage of the situation. But just as he was about to look away, this guy suddenly disappeared from where he was. His figure flashed in front of a barbarian who was about to succeed in killing a soldier. He then returned to his original position with a thoughtful look on his face. This sudden movement made Elt think that his eyes were playing tricks on him. However, when he involuntarily shifted his gaze, he saw that the barbarian was still holding his iron staff up high. A curtain of blood suddenly spurted out from his neck, and his face covered by black hair fell down in a daze. Recalling this scene, Elt subconsciously touched his neck and felt his scalp go numb. That's right, that guy even patted his shoulder and said something. Oh, that's right. Barbarians are indeed human. F***ck, that lunatic. Shaking his head, and at the same time shaking off these messy thoughts, Eltek scratched his head and turned his head to look at his stupefied subordinate. What are you waiting for? Clean up the battlefield. Chapter 471. After a while, the battlefield on this unknown hillside was quickly cleaned up. In the end, 8 people from the spear formation breaking team died, and more than 10 were injured. More people from the heavy sword camp died. Half of the soldiers would stay here forever. Those who survived only had minor injuries, and the rest were all heavily injured. There were even a few who were on the verge of death. They did not feel too sad. It was not that they were cold-blooded, but that none of them were new soldiers. After many battles, they did not care about life and death. Seeing the warm bodies of their comrades turn cold, they were sad and angry, but they were more used to enduring. They would endure until the next time they met the barbarians. The bodies of the sacrificed soldiers could not be taken away, so they dug some graves behind the hillside and buried them there. As for the barbarians, the vultures in the sky were their final resting place. After finishing these things, the teams merged and returned to the checkpoint. Although the heavy sword camp was heavily injured, and some had almost reached their physical limits, they could only rush back to the checkpoint to receive treatment as soon as possible. Eltek was naturally familiar with this area, and suggested that there was a small path nearby to save time. Fry had no objections, so everyone turned and stepped onto the rugged path that was not easy to walk on. Huff, thank you for your help. Sorry, I was prejudiced against you, Huff, but after this, Eltek, am convinced, Huff. Although he tried to control his breathing, his words were still intermittent. Rubbing his nose, Tang En tried to distinguish between the words of gratitude and apology. He immediately guessed what Eltek meant and shrugged. You're too polite, it was just a small matter. Yes, your small matter, Huff, for us it was a matter of life and death. Eltek's face was pale, and he tried hard to express his gratitude. There were many soldiers from the heavy sword camp who were heavily injured, but since they were not dead, they naturally had to be saved. But among them, the luckier ones were only lightly injured. It was not a big problem for them to walk, but it was not easy for them to carry another person. This problem was quite thorny, but it was actually easy to solve. That was to ask the Grey Coat Army for help. However, Eltek was a little hesitant. After all, his attitude wasn't friendly enough and they almost got into a conflict. The other party might not be willing to help. Originally, anyone would feel depressed if they didn't receive the gratitude and respect they deserved after coming to their rescue out of goodwill. After that, he placed most of the soldiers in the ravine and did not participate in the attack. That's right, from his point of view, it was for the sake of stability and preserving the strength to defend and counterattack. But in the eyes of the other party, it was very likely that they would doubt his ability, or that they would be timid because they could not fight side by side. While Elt was worrying about his gains and losses and was trying his best to organize his words, Fry was thoughtful. After considering this, he remembered his old friendship with the Thunderbolt's army and decided to be a good person to the end. He took the initiative to ask his soldiers to cut down some branches and carry the heavily injured Heavy Sword Battalion soldiers. As such, the scene that Eltek was thankful for happened. However, Tang En saw that Eltek's body was like a broken water bag because of running. His wounds were big and small and were bleeding. He shook his head helplessly. Commander Eltek, it's never too late to thank someone. I think it's more important for you to take care of yourself now. It's nothing. Eltek waved his hand and said casually. However, his face was as pale as a sheet of paper and his slightly absent-minded eyes were not very persuasive. He frowned. Forget it, I think it's better to let David carry you. Chem? Tang En was about to turn his head and call David over when the group behind him suddenly stopped. More than 10 soldiers gathered together and shook their heads. What's wrong? Fry walked back from the front. A soldier from the Spear Battalion ran over and looked at Eltek. He turned his head and said, Commander, a brother from the Heavy Sword Battalion is dying. Eltek's face darkened when he heard this. This situation was within his expectations. When they set off, more than 10 soldiers were already dying. To put it bluntly, they could die at any time. If they were left on the hill, they might be able to endure for a few more minutes. However, now that they were walking on a bumpy path, they would naturally die faster. However, there was no other choice. If they didn't return to the checkpoint for treatment, they wouldn't even have a chance to live. More people might even die. Eltek took a deep breath and his chest rose and fell steadily. He saluted. Commander Fry, please help me dig a grave. After receiving an affirmative nod, he quickly walked towards the dead soldier. What a decisive person! Fry looked at Eltek's back and sighed with admiration. Tang En nodded silently. It was clear that although Eltek was saddened by the death of his subordinates, he still decided to use this somewhat cruel method to quickly deal with this matter for the sake of the lives of more soldiers. Fry looked around and pointed at the low hill beside the road. He said to the soldier who came to report, "Take some brothers and dig a grave there. Quickly." "Yes, sir." This unexpected matter was quickly dealt with. Eltek silently stood beside the dead soldier. After a minute, he stroked the soldier's eyes that were widened in pain and carried the body to the grave. He didn't perform a silent ceremony and directly buried the body. Fry sighed and waved his hand when he saw Eltek walking over with red eyes. He was just about to give the order to move out when his arm stopped. He frowned and saw two figures rushing towards him. Needless to say, they were the scouts from the gray space. Normally, when the army was marching, the scouts would return to report to their superiors within a set time even if there were no special circumstances. However, the situation was different now. They were rushing for time. If there were no special circumstances, they only needed to reveal themselves on high ground and appear in Frey's line of sight. However, they were rushing back. It didn't take long for them to guess. When Eltek walked over, the members of the gray space also quickly rushed in front of him. "Commander Fry, there is a caravan 3 kilometers in front of us. There are about 200 people coming this way." Tangen couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. A caravan? This was a battlefield. It was chaotic. How could a caravan dare to take the risk to travel here? Damn it! These traitorous vermin! Fry and Eltek seemed to know something. Their faces darkened at the same time. They were furious and cursed out loud. Seeing Tangen's confused expression, Fry explained, "If I'm not wrong, this so-called caravan is most likely smuggling goods into the northern wilderness. The northern wilderness is cold and the environment is harsh. It's not suitable for crops to grow. Livestock like cattle and sheep aren't enough to fill their stomach. It can be said that they are in a state of semi-starvation all year round. That's why they would occasionally cross the border and come here to steal things." Pause for a while, then continued, "It's because of this situation that some of the mercenaries in the Bran would smuggle food, cotton clothes, and other things to make a huge profit. It's not an exaggeration to say that the reason why the northern wilderness has the spare energy to attack every year is partly because of them. What they gain is profit. Our soldiers have to pay for it with their lives." Tang Yen nodded in realization. "I see. Does the Bran not care?" "Of course they care. According to the Empire's laws, if they are caught smuggling, they will all be executed. But the reality is that this situation is still unchecked." Fry shook his head helplessly. "The northern wilderness is rich in all kinds of precious ores. The profits here are too great. The gallows can't stop the greed of the smugglers." Fry looked at Eltek and said, "And there are many nobles involved. Normal caravans might be afraid of the law, or they might not be able to gather these things that are strictly controlled during wartime. But this isn't a problem for the nobles. They have the connections to avoid the law as much as possible, and they have the means to gather these things. So as long as they have the guts, smuggling is not a problem for them. Take this caravan as an example. This is a military zone, and because of the war, it has long been under martial law. But these 200 people, plus the goods and other vehicles, can swagger through the blockade and appear here. There must be a problem somewhere. And this is definitely not just a matter of money. The border soldiers may not have the guts to do this. There are too many people, and it's easy to make mistakes. This situation can only happen if a noble uses his connections to cooperate with an officer." Tang Yen rubbed his chin and nodded to show that he understood. He turned to Eltek and asked, "Then they must have caught them. How do the soldiers deal with these smugglers when they encounter them?" Eltek looked at Fry with some surprise. Fry was too familiar with the knack of this place, as if he had been here before. He licked his cracked lips and replied, "This depends on the situation. Under normal circumstances, even if the soldiers encounter these smugglers, they won't do anything to them. Or rather, they won't dare to. Of course, they will take out some money as a tribute. Some accept it, some don't, but in the end they will let them pass. He paused. But in times of war like now, the nobles hiding behind the scenes won't dare to act recklessly. The soldiers have another choice, which is to kill all these smugglers. This is a battlefield, and it's normal for people to die. It's hard to find out. This way they can vent their hatred and get the smuggled goods. The goods don't have to be handed over, and the higher-ups won't care. It's an established rule, and it's a reward for the soldiers. Of course, after these goods are exchanged for real money through the black market, it's best to take care of all aspects. This can avoid any trouble in the future. You haven't changed much. Fry pouted and said softly. Eltek looked at Fry again. He was sure that Fry had been on the front line before. Then what do we do now? Ignore them and just pass through? Tangan looked at Eltek and asked. They were in charge here, but Eltek was obviously more anxious, so they still needed his opinion. After a moment of silence, Eltek's eyes flashed fiercely. He raised his head and asked, Brother Tangan, Commander Fry, I know you're very strong, and your soldiers are also very good at fighting. Well, if you don't mind me asking, if you go all out, how long would it take to wipe out this smuggler? Tangan and Fry looked at each other and raised their eyebrows. Tangan touched his nose and said, This depends on the opponent's strength. Well, if it's average, it should be done in a few minutes. Average? Minutes? Eltek's body trembled. He was both confused and shocked. Our method of attack is a bit strange. After explaining, Tangan scratched his head and said, For example, your heavy sword battalion. For example, the average brand soldier battalion. If they don't know about our existence in advance, and we successfully ambush them, it should be done in a few minutes. This is the average meaning? What a joke! Even though Tangan changed his words in time, Eltek still knew that Tangan was using his heavy sword battalion as an example, so he was naturally dissatisfied. But now was not the time to lose his temper. Since Tangan dared to say this, and Fry didn't shake his head in disagreement, then he must have some skills. Thinking up to this point, hammered his palms and bowed deeply at a 90-degree angle. Please help me. I'd rather waste these few minutes than face hundreds of barbarian opponents on the battlefield in the future. There's another reason. Many of our brothers have died this time, and many of them were ordinary soldiers. Their families won't be able to receive much pension at all. I know where the black market merchants in Pasagua are. You can take most of the money from these goods, and I'll send the rest back to our fallen brothers. Please. Chapter 472. In the previous battle, the Spear Destroyer Battalion had more than a dozen people injured, but their lives were not in danger for the time being. Therefore, Frey's attitude towards the smugglers was very casual. They could rob them or let them go. If they robbed them, they would naturally gain some benefits. However, they had just arrived and didn't know the exact location of the black market merchants at Passa checkpoint. Moreover, they were in the military camp, so it was not convenient to find them. However, it was different for the Heavy Sword Battalion. They had too many injured people. Furthermore, Fry had already helped them, so they couldn't go back on their words. Therefore, the final attitude towards the smugglers depended on El. Based on his previous assumption, Air should have ignored the smuggling caravans and rushed back to receive treatment. However, after weighing the pros and cons, he actually asked Tang En to rob the smugglers. The reason was simple. First, he didn't like the idea of robbing the smugglers. Second, he wanted to earn more compensation for the dead soldiers. As for this decision, Tang En had no reason to object. Since there was a ready-made candidate to sell the stolen goods, it was easy to earn some extra money. Plus, there were a few casualties on their side, and because they had just joined, Brand's side didn't give them much of a pension. According to the rules of the Grey Coat Army, the families of the dead soldiers were provided for by the collective. However, although money couldn't be equated with life, no one would complain about having too much money. After the decision was made, the team continued to move forward for a kilometer. They quickly carried the injured soldiers off the path and retreated to the surrounding hills. Tangan led the Greycoat army and disappeared from everyone's sight. The spear battalion placed the injured soldiers on the leeward side of the hill. Then, they all lay on the edge of the hill. They looked like they were watching a great show. From time to time, they would whisper and bet on something. Elt looked around with a confused expression. He quietly moved to Frey's side. After a pause, he whispered, "Commander Frey's team is really enviable. You guys used to be on the front line, right?" Then he thought of something and added, nothing. I'm just asking. If it's not convenient, it's not inconvenient." Fry waved his hand and said flatly, "Yes, I have been here with a few old brothers for a few years." "Oh, no wonder you know this place so well." Elt nodded and continued, "May I know which battlefront Commander Fry was on before? Forgive me for my ignorance, but with your team's combat power, you shouldn't be a nobody." Could you be from the Zechen Legion?" That was possible. The Zechen Legion had many strong people, not to mention the army god, Z. If they didn't have some heaven-defying achievements, it wouldn't be easy for them to stand out. "Haha, that's not it." Shaking his head with a chuckle, Fry hesitated for a moment before he said nonchalantly, "Like Commander Elt, I used to hang out in the Thunderbolt's army." "Yes, but that was a long time ago." Is it also the Thunderbolt's army?" Hearing this, Eltek was stunned. Seeing Fry nod again, he couldn't help but frown and think. "That's impossible. Why haven't I heard of such a team?" Eltek was naturally confused. "Just like the old saying went, Commander Fry. If a soldier is strong, a general will be strong. A team's combat strength, combat style, and so on would be greatly influenced by the commander directly under them." According to what Commander Fry said before, he had only been here with a few of his old buddies, and these soldiers were mostly young. This meant that this team was newly built. This also meant that Commander Fry did indeed have strong leadership skills. Such a person shouldn't be unknown no matter where he was. Could it be that he didn't have this kind of talent when he was in the Thunderbolt's army a long time ago? That's possible. Wait, a long time ago. A thought flashed across Eltek's mind and his body shook. He was completely stunned. After a while, he finally recovered and said with a complicated expression, "Spear formation breaker." Fry. Calming himself down, he swallowed and smiled at Fry. "Haha, Commander Fry, I don't know if you've heard of it. Well, 10 years ago, our Thunderbolt's army had a Thunderbolt's formation breaker team. Haha, what a coincidence, the captain's name is the same as yours." "Oh, someone still remembers." Fry nodded. His expression was a little emotional, but he was still calm. "That's me." This calmness wasn't fake. In Frey's opinion, this was already a thing of the past. Plus, it wasn't a good memory. Many of his buddies had died here, so he naturally didn't want to mention it. F***ck. Eltek suddenly replied. Then he reacted and cursed. Frey's body subconsciously leaned back as if he was frightened. His voice was trembling. You. Are you really Fry? The Fry from the Thunder Spear formation breaking team?" Touching the short beard on his cheek, Fry was a little depressed. "Are there many people named Fry in the Thunderbolt's army?" Out of the military camp in a rage? 3 days and 3 nights, leading a team to raid thousands of miles and take the nobleman's head? Cough, cough, isn't this nonsense? It's true that we took the nobleman's head, but it wasn't like that before. When we came back from the battlefield, we were very angry. But at that time, we complained to our superiors. Many days later, we inadvertently found out that the nobleman was blindly commanding the troops to take credit. Our buddies couldn't take it and decided to take revenge. Of course, we didn't fight our way out of the military camp. At that time, the Thunderbolt's army had nearly 100,000 people. One spit from each of them was enough to drown us several times. We sneaked out of the military camp while patrolling at night. We didn't do anything at all. Well, many people were implicated because of this. After we came out, we didn't raid thousands of miles for 3 days and 3 nights. F***ck, isn't this bullsh**t? Even teleportation isn't that fast. We ran for almost a month before we arrived when the nobleman boarded the ship. In the end, we took the nobleman's head and turned ourselves in. We were sentenced to death. A few days later, we were going to be hanged. But at that time, the death penalty prison was overcrowded, so we were transferred to the prison for serious crimes. Later, we were lucky enough to meet the Lord's butler who came to pick miners. We were all soldiers, so our bodies were strong. In the end, we were selected. After a few changes of hands, we were sent to the mine to mine. Well, there's nothing much to say about what happened after that. After a long time of talking, Fry gloomily told Air the truth about the situation at that time. He really didn't expect that after so many years, their impulsive actions at that time would be spread to such an exaggerated version. But even though he learned the truth from the person involved, this didn't reduce Air's excitement at this time. It should be said that Fry still underestimated the influence of this matter. The army was a place where the whole was important. Only by relying on the soldiers' strict adherence to discipline and tacit understanding could it be possible to win a battle. But because of this, if there was a hero who could withstand all kinds of tests and leave behind a dazzling record, then, even if this hero was a little rebellious and didn't follow the rules, he would still be strongly worshipped by the soldiers. Z was like this, and Fry also had a little bit of this. First of all, it was undeniable that the lightning spear formation breaking team led by Fry was really in the limelight more than 10 years ago. There weren't many people, but their attack power was amazing. Regardless of whether they won a large-scale battle or not, they could always kill countless enemies. In every battle, they would always be the first to break into the enemy's hinterland. This kind of record was enough to make the 3 armies look askance. As for what happened after that, although in the eyes of the nobleman, it should have been sentenced to death. But because of gilding, smuggling, and so on, the frontline soldiers didn't have a good impression of the nobleman. It was only because they were lowly that they could only helplessly endure. But Frey's lightning spear formation breaking team stood up at this time. They rushed thousands of miles and killed the noblemen who were blindly leading the troops. On the surface, this matter seemed to be a solo action by Fry and the others, but in fact, it carried the hidden will of the soldiers. After they succeeded, the soldiers all cheered loudly and shouted with joy. After Fry and the others turned themselves in, they were publicly judged and hanged. There was no news of them after that. The army thought that they were dead. The soldiers naturally couldn't change the outcome of the trial. But in their hearts, the heroic image of Fry and the others was undoubtedly a little sad. To sum it up, they were originally outstanding people, and they did a satisfying act of killing noblemen. In the end, there was a sad color. With all these factors in place, if this tragic heroic melodrama didn't become popular, it would be intolerable. And compared to the other armies, the soldiers of the Thunderbolt's army were undoubtedly the most affected. The Lightning Spear Formation Breaking Team was an elite team of the Thunderbolt's army. The higher-ups of the army naturally didn't want this name to be destroyed, so later on, they made many attempts to rebuild the Lightning Spear Formation Breaking Team. But unfortunately, the results were always unsatisfactory. Some died before they could succeed, and the whole team was wiped out. Although some made some achievements, and even occasionally had amazing results, in the hearts of the soldiers, they were still a little lacking. In short, they didn't deserve the name Lightning Spear Formation Breaking Team. In the end, this name gradually faded. Correspondingly, there were all kinds of exaggerated versions of it. All kinds of complicated and excited feelings couldn't be calmed down. Eltec didn't expect that the dead hero of the army, the captain of the Lightning Spear Formation Breaking Team, Fry, would appear in front of him. And at this time, he didn't have any doubts. Thinking about the previous battle between the lightning spear formation breaking team and the barbarians, everything made sense. So it was Captain Fry who did it, so the result was natural. If Fry knew what Eltec was thinking, he would probably look up and sigh. 300 soldiers against 150 barbarians, and less than 10 of them died. This result was worth bragging about, but now it became natural. F***ck, the pressure was huge. At this time, there were some noises around. The smugglers are here. Eltec was stunned when he heard this, then he patted his head and completely recovered. He respectfully asked, Captain Fry. Yes, Battalion Commander, I have a question to ask you. Chapter 473. Ahem. Fry was shocked by Eltec's respectful attitude. He coughed twice and waved his hand awkwardly. Battalion Commander Eltec, feel free to ask me if you have any questions. You and I are on the same level. There's no need to be so polite. He paused and shook his head with a bitter smile. I don't know what you've made of us, but that's all in the past. I'm now the commander of the Grey Coat Army's Spear Breaker Camp. Do you understand? Yes. Air nodded and put his right hand on his chest. He looked serious. I know Commander Fry you. Yes, I know Commander Fry doesn't want this to be spread. Don't worry, since you think highly of me, I won't tell anyone about your identity and bring you any trouble. Sigh, it's not about that. My current identity is fine. Fry sighed and patted his head helplessly. Obviously, Air had misunderstood. He thought Fry wanted him to keep it a secret to prevent people from digging up the past. Fry didn't care about this at all. However, if he denied it directly, it would seem like he wanted Air to help him spread his name. He decided to change the topic. Right, what did you want to ask just now? Oh, it's like this. Elt made up his mind to keep this secret as he organized his words. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Battalion Commander Fry, you know that these smuggled caravans are definitely not as disciplined as regular soldiers. But since they dare to do this, their combat power is actually not low. There might even be some troublesome people that the caravans spent a lot of money to hire. Of course, their combat power is definitely not as high as the Spear Breaker Camp soldiers, but... He paused and looked at the soldiers around him who weren't prepared for battle. He said weakly, we have to bring our spears. Also, that brother who's good at archery, where did he go? Should we prepare as well? Took Air a lot of effort to say this. In fact, this was what he wanted to ask before. However, he was worried that Fry would feel belittled again. That was why he stopped at the beginning to ease the atmosphere. He didn't expect to find such a powerful person. Naturally, he was more careful with his words. After knowing Frey's identity, Eltec didn't want to ask anymore. With Frey's team's strength, this kind of small problem was naturally not a problem. However, when he saw how relaxed the soldiers were and how some of them didn't even take out their weapons, he couldn't remain calm. Fry was stunned. Who said we did it? Ah? No, it's not you? Patting his forehead, Fry exclaimed, Damn it, what did you boast about the Thunder Spear formation breaking team? Fry pointed at the caravan that was coming from the foot of the mountain as he was exasperated. There are at least 200 people down there. We have to set up the formation and choose the ambush location carefully. We also have to consider whether we need to use the bait tactic or not. Well, even if we ignore all of these and directly attack them, we have to do it. But when it comes to killing people, even if we can't beat them, even a pig knows to run. Do you think we can finish them off in a few minutes? As the battalion commander, Eltec was naturally aware of these things. The only reason he still had this kind of stupid idea was that he still hadn't walked out of the halo of admiration that Fry had for him. Scratching his head in shame, he asked, Then who did it? Fry took a deep breath again and looked defeated. Of course it's them. After a short pause, he stretched his arm forward and pointed at the back of the caravan. 10 figures in black armor had appeared out of nowhere and were now approaching the caravan from behind. Some were slow, some were fast, and they were like beasts creeping towards their prey in the bushes. They were extremely patient. The mountain path was rugged and there were rocks blocking the path from time to time. If it was just an ordinary person walking casually, this path wouldn't be too difficult. However, if other things were added, such as the horses and carriages that were coming from the foot of the mountain, it would be extremely difficult. However, they seemed to be very familiar with this path, and had made sufficient preparations. Therefore, even though the caravan was slow, it was still moving forward. "Big brother, what's wrong?" 2 middle-aged men were walking at the front. They were both wearing cotton-padded clothes, but one of them looked dignified and had a burly body. The other one was tall and thin with a gloomy face and was looking around. The one who was talking now was the burly man. "Nothing. I just feel that something is wrong here. I think I'm overthinking." The man with the gloomy face looked away and shook his head. "Big brother, you're just too careful." The burly man didn't think much of it. "Haha, in our line of work, it's always good to be careful." The tall and thin middle-aged man chuckled and suddenly turned his head. Behind them were still the mountain carriages, the guards, and nothing else. Finally, his expression relaxed a little. The burly man saw this and smacked his lips. He said casually, "TSK, don't worry, big brother. This isn't the first time we've been on this path. When have we had any problems? Besides, there are only 2 kinds of people here. One is the barbarians, and the other is the brand soldiers. If it's the barbarians, we have a token with us. They want us to come so they can escort us there. If it's the brand soldiers..." He paused and laughed. "Haha, it's impossible for the brand soldiers to appear. Didn't the greedy guy at the checkpoint say that there's no battle around? Where did the brand soldiers come from? No. Although that guy took a lot of money from us, we can't believe everything he says." The tall and thin man shook his head slightly. "Didn't the other person we bribed also say that there's a heavy sword battalion that's being besieged by the barbarians 30 miles southeast of here? They even sent a battalion of soldiers to rescue them this morning." Speaking of this, the tall and thin man couldn't help but frown and sigh. The higher-ups are too anxious. In fact, it's best to set off a few days later. Sigh, forget it, it's too late to say this now. I just hope we don't meet them. "Big brother, you said that the rescue team is the Grey Coat Army's Long Spear Battalion?" "Haha." The brawny man couldn't help but laugh. He kicked away the gravel beside his feet. "Don't worry, the number of barbarians must be large if they can trap the heavy sword battalion of the Thunderbolt's army. Let's not talk about whether the Grey Coat Army's Long Spear Battalion can arrive in time. They better pray that they don't arrive. Otherwise, these commoners who only use farming tools will die a horrible death." Rubbing his palms, the burly man's expression became even more excited. "Let's take a step back. Even if they drive away the barbarians and save the heavy sword battalion, both sides will certainly suffer heavy losses. If they encounter us again... last month we had several batches of goods robbed. Let's not talk about these losses for the time being. The most important thing is that many of our brothers have been killed or injured. Their courage has also decreased. Otherwise, why would we take this risk this time? If there's a chance, what will you do?" Hearing this, the tall and thin man's face suddenly sank. His gloomy face became more serious. He angrily reprimanded, "How many times do I have to say it for you to understand? Business is business. Don't mix it with other messy things." Pause for a while's expression became more severe. "Do you think this is still the same as before when we fought for territory? Revenge. Do you have the right to take revenge? We are now seeking money. Do you understand that we are seeking money? What we need to do is to secretly avoid everyone and deliver this batch of goods to the barbarians. Then, we will take the money we deserve. If we accidentally meet the brand soldiers, we will smile and give them the toll. This is what we can do. What if the brand soldiers want our goods and want to kill us? I ask you, what will you do? Of course, we have to resist. If we fail and get killed, then we deserve it. If we succeed in resisting and kill these soldiers, we can only escape. Don't think about it. We will be found out. Do you think those nobles will still protect us? Do they dare? We will still die in the end. One wrong step and we will die. Am I right? Speak. The tall and thin man's words were like raindrops hitting a banana leaf. They were urgent and fast. Accompanied by the last angry shout, his aura became stronger and his expression became more ferocious. The burly man was obviously a little scared. His body was bent, and he didn't dare to wipe the spit off his face. He replied timidly, Big brother, I was just saying, clap, clap, clap. Suddenly, just when the atmosphere was tense, a few claps came from behind. Then, 2 palms were placed on the shoulders of the strong man and the tall and thin man respectively. An ordinary face appeared between the 2 men. He turned his head and looked at the stunned strong man. Only the stupidity of the younger brother can set off the wisdom of the big brother. You did a good job. Keep it up. I am very optimistic about you. He turned his head and looked at the tall and thin man whose face changed dramatically. He nodded and showed undisguised appreciation. You are very creative. Learn to cook from me. Chapter 474. The battle at the foot of the mountain, or more accurately, the one-sided massacre, had been settled. From afar, the man called Tang-un was hugging the last 2 people and talking about something. Then, the tall and thin man on the left turned his head to look at the caravan behind. His expression was unclear, but from the way he turned his head, it was clear that he was frightened. It was normal for him to be frightened. Even he, who had witnessed the entire battle, felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. His scalp was numb previously. When he found out that it was not Spearbreaker who attacked, Elt was puzzled. However, when Fry pointed to the back of the caravan, his doubts were solved. There were more than 10 black figures slowly approaching the guards at the back of the caravan. It was these people, and that guy called Tang-en. Even though they were a little far away, Elt could still recognize the identity of this group of people from their different black armor. The one leading them was Tang-en, who seemed a little crazy to Elt. With just these, 20 to 30 people, how could they destroy the caravan in a few minutes? Elt counted the number of black-armored figures and looked at Fry, who was looking down with rapt attention. He held back his doubts and did not voice them out. Yes, in the previous battle with the barbarians, he knew that this guy called Tang-en should be very skilled, but what could these few people do? Could it be that they all had the same level of skill as Twain? Elt's doubts were reasonable. Just as Fry said, there were more than 200 people in the caravan below. If they were organized, their fighting power would be considerable. It would not be easy to destroy them all in one go. Even if they could not win, they would at least know how to run. This was the wilderness and there were groups of mound. If they really scattered and ran, it would be wishful thinking to wipe them all out. Once a few of them ran away, the situation would become troublesome. The brand soldiers attacking the smuggling caravan was justified, but now everyone knew that there was a noble behind the caravan. As a result, the soldiers were in a passive position. If all of these people were killed, it would naturally be a good thing. On the other hand, if the nobles found clues that could be investigated, it would not be difficult to find them in a short period of time. Now that it was a time of war, these nobles naturally would not do anything. However, this grudge was definitely formed. The soldiers were in the barracks and couldn't go anywhere. It was very likely that they would find a good opportunity to take revenge in the future. Then, just as Elt was worrying about his gains and losses, the black-armored soldiers made their move right under his nose. As the path was narrow, The caravan was naturally in the shape of a long snake. It could be seen that these smugglers were very cautious. More than 200 of them were evenly distributed in front and behind the caravan. This was especially true for the rear, where the armors of the guards were even better. It was hard to say how strong they were, but their personalities were all rather cautious, and they would occasionally look around and observe. But no matter how they observed, the black-armored men behind them seemed to have predicted their actions. The moment they turned their gazes, the black-armored men calmly dodged into the various obstacles on the side of the road. Soon, they were within a few meters of each other. Then, the man named Tang and made an inconspicuous gesture. Ugh! Elt, who was at the peak of the mountain, trembled. His hand that was rubbing his eyes subconsciously stopped in mid-air. In his line of sight, the black-armored men were like cheetahs in the jungle. They quickly flashed out from their hiding places and appeared behind the guards in an instant. They made the same standard movement. They covered their mouths, raised their hands, and flashed their blades across the necks of the guards. Ah! Elt's half-syllable scream was forcefully swallowed. As if he could feel the pain himself, Elt's hand that was suspended in the air reached for his neck. The howling cold wind in his ears instantly disintegrated into wisps of light wind. The killing continued. After the black-armored men succeeded, they did not repeat the same action on the guards in front of them. Instead, they silently put down the corpses in their hands, passed by the guards, and rushed towards the targets further ahead. Be careful! Aren't we exposed? Suspicion flashed through Elt's mind, but it was immediately overshadowed by an even greater shock. Another group of black-armored men appeared out of nowhere, and similarly, they instantly appeared behind the guards who were either stunned or about to scream. They covered their mouths, raised their hands, and flashed their blades without any pause. This silent massacre quickly spread to the front. Everyone in the caravan was unaware of this. Some of them lowered their heads and rushed forward listlessly. They kicked off the gravel beside their feet, and then their mouths were covered and their throats slit. Some of them gathered together and chatted with smiles on their faces that all men understood. Then, they were killed at the same time. Some of them subconsciously turned their heads to observe, and then halfway through, their necks collided with the incoming blade. Their expressions and actions were different, but the result was the same. There were no deafening roars, no low moans, no blood-boiling sounds of weapons clashing, and no domineering aura that illuminated the entire area. It was silent and eerie. There were only two groups of black-armored men that quickly and orderly weaved in and out. They were like waves on the beach, one higher than the other, until they swallowed the entire beach. The pale white sun was still hanging in the sky as usual. Its slightly warm light could not compete with the cold wind, but it still tried its best to bring light and warmth to the world. However, Elt could not feel even the slightest bit of warmth at this time. His gaze was fixed on the ground, and it was as if there was a ghostly aura around him. His body felt as if it had fallen into an ice cellar. He had also fought on the front lines for many years. Although he did not have any great achievements, and had only recently climbed to the position of battalion commander, he had personally experienced many battles. However, even if he scratched his head and cracked his skull, he could not think of when he had seen such a way of fighting. Was this still a battle? Was there anyone who killed like this? Elt's eyes were already blurred. In his vision, the flashing black-armored men had become sharp blades, and the entire caravan was a ball of thread, tangled together in a complicated mess. What these sharp blades were doing now was to find the weak points of the ball of thread, and then decisively cut down without disturbing the other threads. As the number of cuts increased, the weak points naturally became bigger and bigger. In the end, the entire ball of thread was straightened out. That was it, that was it. Wow, as expected of the gray space. A soldier around him could not help but shake his head. His tone and expression were as if he had eaten a sumptuous meal. He was both satisfied and somewhat emotional. The battle below had completely ended when Tang En casually smashed the heads of the two leaders of the smuggling group together. Now, he was waving his hand towards the peak of the mountain, beckoning everyone to come down. "I've been calculating the time." Another soldier smacked his lips, stood up and said, "TSK, TSK, 1 minute and 1 second. The battle ended." "That's not accurate." "Hey look." Boss Tang En did not even make a move before, and later on, he even chatted with the two of them for a while. "So the time should be, hard to calculate. Anyway, it's definitely within 1 minute. If that's the case, if Boss Tang En was given a few days, wouldn't the barbarians be completely wiped out? I think we should go back, wash up, and sleep. There's nothing for us to do." Of course not. If it's a normal battle, a few minutes should be enough." Thinking about what Tang En said earlier, Elt's body tensed up, and he unconsciously swallowed his saliva. What kind of joke is this? He actually did it, and in less than a minute. If it's my heavy sword battalion, how long can it last? God, if this is just a nightmare, please let me wake up quickly. Obviously, the strong contrast and shocking result had caused this commander, who had experienced many battles, to have a serious sense of unreality. "Commander Elt, ah?" Cough cough. Looking at Elt's blank expression, Fry coughed lightly and shook his head helplessly. He could roughly understand Elt's feelings, because he had the same feeling before. He patted his shoulder and said, "Let's go, the battle is over. We need to quickly pack up and rush back to the checkpoint." After pausing for a while, he decided to give some advice to this younger generation who worshipped him. "Don't think about it, there's no point in comparing. There's only one such team in the entire Caesar continent, and it can't be replicated. You should be glad that there aren't many of you, right? Otherwise, us soldiers would really have to go back to wash up and sleep." Chapter 475. Time was of the essence. Once they reached the foot of the mountain, they abandoned the caravan's corpses on the side of the road. They also dumped a few carts of goods and placed the wounded soldiers on the carriages. Then, they turned their horses around and immediately set off. Since the road had already been cleared by the caravan, any obstacles along the way had been cleared. In addition, the members of the gray space were indeed good at driving. Of course, the most important thing was that they didn't care too much about the goods. Therefore, even though the road was winding, their speed was still much faster than walking. But even so, after half an hour, the dying soldiers of the Heavy Sword Battalion were still dying one after another. When the first soldier died, the caravan even stopped to bury him. When the second soldier stopped convulsing, looked at him silently. His expression was like that of a dying beast. He waved his hand and ordered the carriages to continue moving. Finally, when the 9th soldier died, the carriages passed through the small path and entered the wilderness. Naturally, the carriages moved faster here. Because of this, the soldiers running behind them couldn't keep up with them. Seeing this, Fry decisively ordered David and Michaud to drive the carriages back with the wounded soldiers. In order to prevent any accidents, Tang En simply ordered the Gray Spaces members to guard the side. Their speed was needless to say. It was easy for them to keep up with the carriages, and with them by the side, even if they couldn't solve all the problems, they could at least detect the enemy in advance. In fact, after a few hours of running, they were not far from the checkpoint. But not long after the carriages left, couldn't hold on any longer. If it wasn't for Tang En's quick reaction, he would have fallen to the ground. Then, a soldier from the Spear Battalion carried him on his back and continued forward. Had lost too much blood and was dizzy for a while. His life was not in danger, so he soon woke up. He was a stubborn person. Naturally, he wasn't used to being carried by others. But now, he didn't refuse. He just looked at the checkpoint in silence. Obviously, he was worried about the safety of his soldiers. Fry and the others naturally couldn't persuade him. The feeling of watching one's own soldiers, or more accurately, watching one's own brothers, slowly die was something that couldn't be understood if one didn't experience it personally. Fry and the others had experienced it before. They knew how sad and desperate it was. They also knew that words were useless in front of this kind of feeling. Therefore, they didn't know what to say. Fortunately, this heavy atmosphere didn't last long. After running for half an hour, the city walls of the checkpoint were already in sight. At this moment, Tang En frowned, and his long and narrow eyes unconsciously narrowed. After the systematic training, Tang En's eyesight had actually improved. They weren't as talented as Luke, but they still had some advantages over ordinary people. In his line of sight, there were many people gathered together at the main entrance of the checkpoint, as if something had happened. What was even more obvious was that the rows of soldiers standing on the city walls were clearly holding bows and arrows. What's going on? Are the barbarians attacking us? Everyone looked at each other in dismay as they walked closer. This was obviously not possible. If the barbarians had really attacked, the checkpoint wouldn't be in such a deadlock. Instead, it would have evolved into a battlefield filled with war cries. As they got closer, they realized that the people gathered were actually brand soldiers. They didn't seem nervous at all. Instead, they looked relaxed. The people behind them stood on their tiptoes and looked inside. From time to time, they would discuss among themselves as if they were watching a show. It seemed that something had happened at the gate and they were stuck outside. Voices could be heard. Damn, how many days have they been here? Why don't I have this luck? Look, there are dozens of carriages. We're rich. They're rich for sure, but it's hard to say if it's theirs. A bunch of bumpkins. They don't have any foresight. Serves them right. You can't say that. According to the rules, it should be theirs. Well, maybe they just got here and didn't know how to organize things. It's a pity that this matter has already blown up. They might even have to hand over all the goods. I don't think that's the only thing. I heard that there are heavily injured soldiers in the carriages. They're in a hurry to enter the city for treatment. Is that so? These soldiers are too much. It doesn't matter if they're too much or not. They're all bumpkins anyway. That's true, the noise continued. Tang En and Fry looked at each other, and their expressions changed drastically. The gray coat army, carriages, and wounded soldiers. Needless to say, it must be David and the others who had rushed back first. Oh no. It's my fault, it's my fault. Fry hammered his palm, looking anxious. It's my fault for not thinking of this. David and the others must have been stopped by the soldiers when they entered the city and asked for benefits. That was indeed the case. David and the others had just arrived, so they were not clear about some of the rules that were only agreed upon and not explicitly written. They drove the carriages to the checkpoint. As they were in a hurry to treat the wounded soldiers, they naturally wanted to enter the city in a hurry. There was nothing wrong with this move. Although this was a checkpoint, David and the others were not barbarians. Moreover, they were officially established by the brand. Usually, the soldiers at the gate would not come forward to check at all. But when the soldiers saw the smuggled goods, they had a problem, as mentioned earlier. If the smuggled goods were seized by the soldiers, according to the tacit rules here, they should belong to the soldiers themselves. However, wealth and silk moved people's hearts. In front of such a valuable batch of goods, naturally, everyone wanted a share of the profits. The same was true for these city guards. When they saw the smuggled goods, they immediately stopped the carriages and came up to check. The so-called inspection was naturally fake. The real thing was to ask for benefits. In the past, those lucky brand soldiers would share some of the goods with them, either to avoid trouble or to be happy. But David and the others did not know about this obscure way of asking. If they knew, they would naturally do the same. But because they were in a hurry to save people, the meticulous Michaud did not immediately think of this aspect. He could only stop the carriages and let them check. When these city guards saw that these new bumpkins were so unruly, they immediately became angry. They just checked slowly and had no intention of letting them go at all. As a result, David and the others were undoubtedly angry, and their attitude became even more impatient. When the two sides exchanged fire, the scene suddenly froze, and no one could get out of the situation. At this time, it was too late for Michaud to react. As the saying goes, people want face and trees want bark. There were already a lot of people gathered around, so the city guards naturally would not slap themselves in the face and let them pass for some benefits. As for the heavily injured soldiers of the Heavy Sword Battalion on the carriages, they naturally also saw them. But there was also a way to deal with this. After that, they just pretended not to see and insisted that it was a normal inspection, and the other side did not say anything. In fact, this matter was not Frey's fault. When he was a soldier, the front line was full of brand soldiers. As long as they were brand soldiers, even if they really did not know this rule, the city guards would not dare to make things difficult for them, so he naturally did not think of this. "Hey, look, they are going to fight!" There was a commotion among the gathered soldiers, and they all tried to tiptoe to get inside. Hearing this, Tang Yan's face darkened. He quickly looked at the archers on the wall, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. "Follow me, charge!" After that, he grabbed the shoulder of a soldier in front of him who kept trying to get inside and threw him back. Then, he stretched out his hands, grabbed the soldier's shoulder, and threw him back. Frey was also decisive. He quickly ordered the spearmen to block the gap and then rushed inside. "Ouch, what's going on? What are you squeezing for?" "Fuck, who stepped on me? F***ck, who dares to hit me? Watching a show was a great joy in life, so there were a lot of soldiers gathered here. Especially after knowing that there was going to be a fight inside, the gaps between the crowd became even denser. However, none of this could stop Tang Yan from advancing alone. With an expressionless face, his hands fluttered, and one figure after another flew out from all directions. Some directly landed on the empty ground behind him, some landed on the heads of the people around him, and some, like the one who called himself Daddy, was hit by several figures in the air. Frey and the others followed closely behind. They did not need to throw people, they only needed to widen the passage in an instant and squeeze out the surrounding people. If the people who were thrown out now looked down, they would find that with Frey and the others as the boundary, the dense crowd on both sides retreated in the opposite direction, like waves hitting the reef. It was really spectacular. Chapter 476. Tang Yan suddenly went berserk, causing a huge uproar. After more than a dozen people fell, the gathered soldiers finally regained their senses. As soon as they turned their heads, they were thrown out again. F***ck, who is this? This armor, is it a bumpkin who came to help? F***ck, too arrogant. Nothing to say, beat them up. They were just enjoying the show, but they were thrown into the air. The soldiers were furious. Some of them who were close to them directly beat them up. Frey and the others formed a fence with their spears. They were like hedgehogs, and it was difficult to hit them. Tang Yan, on the other hand, was alone. There were soldiers in all directions, and he was attacked in an instant. As a result, the chaos was even greater. Fists, legs, elbows, knees, they were all veterans of the battlefield. They knew that weapons were not allowed to be used in this kind of situation. But even so, the strength, timing, angle, and so on of every attack were subconsciously in the style of the battlefield. If an ordinary person was hit a few times, they would probably have to lie on the ground for a long time. Of course, Tang Yan was not an ordinary person. His expression did not change, and his footsteps did not stop. His hands were like shadows. They seemed to be dancing chaotically, but he was always able to find flaws in the dense attacks. According to the order, he methodically broke and counterattacked. Bang, bang, bang. crack, 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 the sound of collisions sounded like rain hitting banana leaves, mixed with the sound of bones breaking and cries of pain. In just a moment, the surrounding soldiers, who were separated by a layer of soldiers, could not help but open their mouths in shock. What kind of joke was this? Although the relationship between the two sides was not friendly, no one used weapons, and no fighting aura flashed. Both sides were completely relying on close-range physical combat. In this case, it was useless no matter how fast one's reaction was. The surrounding was densely packed with people. Even if one reacted quickly, there was no way to resist. So, in this place, the physically strong should have the advantage. But now, the reality was completely different. The person in the middle was still moving forward. Some attacks landed on his body, and some even hit his joints and other important parts. However, the person in the middle didn't seem to feel anything. He continued to move forward and counterattack with a calm expression. There were even some who went berserk and directly hugged his body. However, those arms that seemed to be wrapped around him like steel were easily grabbed and broken by him. That body that wasn't very majestic now looked more like a galloping heavy cavalry. It was completely unstoppable. Tang En rushed to the front, followed by Fry and the others. The whole slender team was like a red-hot iron stick poking into a bubble. The crowd retreated. In the end, the onlookers became the center of attention. The commotion here naturally attracted everyone's attention. Therefore, when Tang En waved his hand and pushed away a row of soldiers, the conflict that was about to break out inside stopped for the time being. Sure enough, it was David and the others. At this time, they had already grabbed their weapons and were scattered around the carriages. From time to time, they would look at the archers on the city wall and the rows of soldiers at the city gate. Their faces were filled with anger and indifference. "Boss!" Michaud greeted him with a gloomy face. Their mission was to quickly bring the wounded soldiers to the checkpoint treatment center, but they were forced to stop here and wasted so much time. Michaud's face was naturally ugly. He walked to Tang En's side and whispered the matter quickly. Sure enough, as he had heard before, it was because the city guards wanted to ask for benefits. Tang En looked at the city guards who were more and more nervous because of their arrival and frowned. "You didn't say that the wounded soldiers behind were from the Brand Heavy Sword Battalion?" Yes, there was a soldier who should have seen it when he was checking. At that time, he also said something in the captain's ear. Then they stopped checking and blindly made things difficult for us. These bastards! Fry was furious when he heard this. It was obvious that these soldiers were embarrassed, so they simply pretended not to see it and prepared to deny it. On the other hand, if the wounded soldiers were from the Grey Coat Army, the other party would not care even more. Tang En looked at Fry. "What do we do now?" To be honest, they did not care. Most of the wounded soldiers were from the Heavy Sword Battalion. Although some of them were injured, it was not fatal. If it were the members of the Grey Coat Army or the Spear Battalion who were injured, Tang En and Fry would have led their men to fight their way in. Fry naturally thought of this. He pondered for a while and his face was troubled. If the other party wants to deny it, then this matter will be difficult. Well, the chaos here is not short. Later on, there will definitely be officers coming out. As Fry was speaking, a piercing sound of metal rubbing against each other was heard. Then, he saw Elt's face was solemn. He dragged his heavy sword and walked unsteadily from the side. The problem is solved. Elt was the commander of the Brand Heavy Sword Battalion. It was best for him to come out. Fry shook his head and sighed softly. But we don't know how many soldiers missed the best time to be treated. Elt was thinking about Frey's question, but when he saw the moaning and moaning soldiers in the passing vehicles, he did not dare to think about it. The only thing he could be sure of was that he was angry, very angry. Halfway through, Elt stopped and looked up at the archers on the city wall. Because Tang En and the others who had just broken through were silently looking at Elt, the surrounding soldiers also quieted down. After sneaking a glance at Tang En, they focused on the staggering Elt. Some of them reacted quickly and seemed to have thought of something. Their faces turned ugly. No way, these soldiers were so bold. Even though Er was covered in blood and was in an extremely sorry state, the soldiers on the city wall naturally recognized him since they saw each other frequently. They looked at each other and unconsciously put down their bows. They retracted their gazes and continued forward until they reached the city gate. The soldiers did not dare to look at Elt's eyes. After looking at each other, a person who looked like a captain walked out. Haha, if it isn't Elt, Commander Elt. Why? Are you going to enter the city? Please, please. Under Elt's gaze, his voice gradually weakened. Suddenly, the heavy sword was raised high to block the light that was pouring down. The captain hurriedly took a step back and forced a smile. Hee, sir, we were talking so nicely. What are you doing? I'm King your mother. With a roar, Elt stepped forward. His body lit up with a red light. At the same time, 7 to 8 blood curtains shot out. The heavy sword thunder slashed down. Bang! Elt was just a normal soldier. Naturally, he could not block the attack of Elt's heavy sword. He hurriedly raised his spear and was slapped to the ground. Huff! The second sword paused in the air and missed the opportunity. It brushed past the captain lying on the ground and stabbed into the ground. Sir, what are you doing? Even though Elt's body was shaking, the pale captain did not dare to fight back. He threw away his spear and only knew how to use his arm to support himself. You still don't want to admit it. Huff. You still don't want to admit it. Elt was panting and yelling. He stepped forward again and slashed down with his heavy sword. Bang! Ah! There was a scream. This time, the heavy sword that was aimed at the captain's head cut into his thigh. Blood immediately gushed out like a fountain. Help! Help! You still don't want to admit it. The heavy sword slashed askew and dirt flew everywhere. Spare me, sir. I admit it. I was wrong. Help. Admit it. The heavy sword stopped in the air. Elt's eyes were unfocused as he tried to recognize the figure on the ground. Huff. Admit it and you deserve to die. Bang, 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 the scene was silent. The crazy Elt swung his heavy sword like a robot. Some of the swords slashed askew while others hit the ground. There was a bloody body on the ground. In the afternoon, a few soldiers splashed water on the ground. The blood at the city gate was finally diluted and cleared. The soldiers that were gathered here had already dispersed and entered the city. Of course, this matter would not end so easily. Before the higher-ups at the checkpoint came to a conclusion, the soldiers were already chatting about this matter. At the checkpoint, in a corner facing away from the sun, a few soldiers sat on the ground lazily, each holding a low-quality cigarette in their hands. Cough, cough, tui. A soldier spat out a few strands of tobacco that he accidentally inhaled and grinned. I think old Ba doesn't want to live anymore. What kind of King cigarette is this? It's so King annoying. Old Ba was the owner of a grocery store in the checkpoint. Another soldier beside him took a puff and exhaled smoke. Alright, look at how much money you gave him. It's already good that old Ba is willing to let you smoke. Haha, that's right, us third-rate soldiers. Well, I've seen an officer before. He's a noble. He's so particular about smoking. He even has a white jade cigarette holder. That high-quality tobacco, TSK. Just smelling it makes me feel good. Smelling the smoke? Ha, you're so cheap. It's just smoking. No matter how cheap it is, it's still better than this stupid cigarette. Haha, that's true. After chatting for a while, the topic naturally turned to the incident at the city gate. Have you heard about the incident at the city gate? A soldier reluctantly threw away the cigarette in his hand and stepped on the sparks before turning to ask. Of course I've heard about it. It's such a big matter. Unfortunately, I came back late and didn't get to see it. A young soldier shook his head regretfully. Then, as if he had thought of something, He turned to look at the old soldier who had been smoking silently. "Old Hyman, didn't you come back early? How was it? Did you see it?" Old Hyman. Old Hyman slowly nodded after the young soldier asked again, as if he had just woken up from a dream. "I was indeed there." Hearing this, the soldiers' spirits were suddenly lifted, and they all gathered together. Tell me, what exactly happened?" Old Hyman shook his head with a smile. "Ha ha, didn't you guys hear about it? It's more or less like that." Chapter 477. There were many forces and groups on the Caesar continent, but only the Bran Empire and the northern wilderness tribes could truly be called countries. Whether it was the theory that two tigers couldn't live on the same mountain, or some other reason, the truth had long been submerged in the yellow sands of history. Today's reality was that the two countries were like fire and water, and were at war. The war between the two countries was a comprehensive confrontation in all aspects, and the soldiers were the most direct carriers of violence. Thus, the source of soldiers was particularly important. Needless to say, the northern wilderness tribes were all soldiers. The Bran Empire was a bit more complicated. There was also a conscription system, but there were still many soldiers who had no choice but to join for food. As for the soldiers, the newspapers of the cities in the rear described them as brave and courageous, coldly killing the enemy, charging with a sword even after losing an arm, and so on. Of course, there was a need for publicity, but the main reason was that these people had never been to the front lines and didn't know the true situation of the soldiers. Years of walking on the edge of life and death, reading the Chikwa battlefield, seeing the fierce bloodstains, they also knew the gap between themselves. Even if they previously had the dream of killing the enemy and returning home with glory. In the end, most of the ordinary soldiers were only left with the idea of being cautious and hoping that they would be lucky enough to survive. And the word soldier was added with a lot of glory, but for many people, it was just a job that could support their family. But it had to be said that this job wasn't something that anyone could do. Not to mention the high risk, the mental pressure was enough to make all the weak people walk away. Rest, go to the battlefield, luckily not dying, continue to go to the battlefield. It should be said that there weren't many people with nerves like David. More people used various methods to relieve the pressure, like the soldiers squatting in the corner leisurely smoking, using the slightly tipsy smoke to numb their nerve. This was one of them. In addition to relieving the mental pressure, the life of a soldier was mostly boring. When they first joined, they were busy with training, and after training, they were busy with fighting. It could be said that it was boring and depressing. If there was a new topic to talk about at this time, it would naturally be excellent. Coincidentally, something big happened at the Passa checkpoint. So, it was really the city guards who deliberately ignored the seriously injured soldiers? F***ck, damn it. Oh, the captain is already dead. After hearing old Hyman's words, the young soldier said angrily. After all, they didn't want to encounter such a situation one day when they were injured. Old Hyman nodded his head. Yes, everyone present heard the captain admit it. However, in the end, he was still beaten to death by Battalion Commander L. Good. Don't you know how many people he has killed? Amidst the sounds of beating, a soldier suddenly laughed and said, "Ha, I think that guy is quite unlucky. TSK, dozens of carts of goods, who wouldn't be envious?" Unfortunately, they had encountered the Grey Coat Army, who had just arrived and did not know the rules. Furthermore, there were even heavily injured soldiers in the carriages. Ha, really? That's for sure, but he's not the only unlucky one now. No wonder I found a new batch of soldiers at the city gate when I came back today. So that's why. This won't kill all of them, right? The young soldier clicked his tongue. It's hard to say. Look at what they did. He shook his head. However, now that the captain is dead, if those soldiers were smarter and pushed all the blame onto him, they shouldn't all be beheaded. That's true. What do you say, old Hyman? After all, he was a veteran. Even if he didn't have the brute force of a charge on the battlefield, he still had plenty of experience. Therefore, after a soldier finished speaking, he immediately asked for old Hyman's opinion. I say, none of this is important. Old Hyman pinched out the cigarette butt and took a deep breath. Then, he exhaled the last cloud of smoke, his expression somewhat complicated. It doesn't matter if those fellows die or not. The important thing is this gray coat army. I'm afraid we have misjudged them before. They are really terrifying. Eh? Why do you say that? The young soldier was slightly stunned, his expression somewhat disapproving. You don't know, Battalion Commander Elt beat people to death, but that happened later. Previously, because the city gate was blocked, we were all watching from the surroundings. There were at least a few thousand people. Several battalions were there. With so many people gathered in a circle, it was airtight. As if thinking of something, old Hyman's face twitched nervously. However, after the gray coat army arrived, they directly charged in. Wait. A soldier scratched his head, somewhat puzzled. Charge? So many people. Didn't Battalion Commander Elt and the others let them in? Let them in? They could have let them in, but they had no choice. Old Hyman laughed bitterly and continued, At that time, my position was close to the inside. After hearing the commotion, I turned my head. The moment I turned around, I saw more than 10 figures flying around randomly. They were all soldiers who were watching the show. Then, I heard that it was the Gray Coat Army who did it. Actually, under such circumstances, no one would have let them in. If they hadn't, they wouldn't have been able to enter. However, after seeing them make a move, the surrounding people were somewhat angry and decided to beat them up. Whoa! A few soldiers immediately became excited. And then, indeed, they were too arrogant. Even if they couldn't enter, they couldn't have just made a move. With a few thousand people, TSK, wouldn't their heads turn into pig heads? Old Hyman licked his lips and shook his head. His expression became even more complicated. And then we still couldn't stop them. The crowd was even forced to disperse to the side. Then, I saw the person from the Gray Coat Army who made a move. He was the only one who made a move. He had an ordinary face, wore black armor, and casually waved his hands. He didn't even look at his surroundings. However, the soldiers who made a move were either repelled or had their arms and legs broken. They could only watch as he walked forward step by step, against everyone else. Even this couldn't be stopped. One person? Old Hyman, if this is humor, I admit that I was shocked. However, this isn't funny at all. Hearing this, the soldiers were all stunned. Then, they looked at old Hyman as if they were listening to a fantasy story. Their meaning was clear. You're King kidding me? Old Hyman waved his hand, his face full of bitterness. I also want to say that this is a joke, but it really happened. Moreover, it happened right under my nose. That person didn't use any weapons or fighting aura. He just used his hands to fight. You all know Malink, the commander of the Saber Battalion. He's the fierce man who once split the barbarians in half on the battlefield. He just happened to be on that path and made a move. However, just as he raised his fist, his wrist was grabbed and kicked to the side. He refused to accept this. After getting up, he pushed away a few people and hugged that person's waist from behind. It seemed that he wanted to flip that person over. However, that person didn't move at all. After dragging Malink a few steps forward, he casually stretched out his hand and broke his arm. When I came over just now, I saw Malink's subordinates surrounding the treatment center. The facts were undoubtedly persuasive. No one would use such words that could be immediately exposed as an example. Because of this, the few soldiers opened their mouths but didn't say anything for a long time. Moreover, just now I was thinking. Old Hyman first spread his hands, then picked up a cigarette and lit it up. Enveloped by the smoke, his expression was somewhat strange. Apart from this somewhat terrifying person, this Spear Destroyer battalion shouldn't be simple either. What do you mean? Old Hyman lowered his head and took a puff. Holding the cigarette between two fingers, he organized his thoughts and continued. Everyone knows that Battalion Commander Elt's Heavy Sword Battalion is trapped. Although many of our people went out this morning, it's naturally impossible to say that there wasn't a battalion of soldiers at the checkpoint. However, in the end, the commanding officers still sent out the Grey Coat Army's Spear Destroyer Battalion. What does this mean? The commanding officers' thoughts are similar to ours. They don't think that the Grey Coat Army has any decent fighting power. Sending them over shows that the commanding officers don't think that the Heavy Sword Battalion can hold on until then. It's just for show. But the result? Battalion Commander Elt came back with more than 100 wounded soldiers. They were beaten so miserably. This shows that there are a lot of barbarians. At least, it's not something that the Heavy Sword Battalion can resist. Otherwise, with Battalion Commander Elt's temper, how could he send people back to ask for help as soon as he saw them? There's no need to guess. The crux of the problem is definitely the Spear Destroyer Battalion that went to rescue them. Who? I didn't count carefully before, but the Spear Destroyer Battalion's formation was indeed in perfect condition. Therefore, even if there were casualties, it wouldn't be more than 20. Cough cough. Old Hyman seemed to be frightened by his own deduction. He coughed a few times, his body trembling. After slightly calming down, he said, We can say that they are waiting at ease for an exhausted enemy, or taking advantage of the situation to take advantage of the situation. But the problem is, even if this is the case, how many casualties did we suffer when we succeeded in the past? I don't dare to think about it, I don't dare to think about it. Old Hyman laughed bitterly, and a faint smoke surrounded him. With such a terrifying person and such an elite team, the Grey Coat Army can't be underestimated. Chapter 478. The barren hills stretched as far as the eye could see. The dull sky was bleak. A few solitary goshawks soared against the wind, letting out mournful cries from time to time. It was a scenery that never changed, and the weather was always cold to the bone. This was the front line. There were no exquisite buildings in the south, no soft voices of the people there, and no beautiful mountains and rivers. Perhaps if there were any southerners who came here, they would sigh at the loneliness of the Great Wall. However, the people who lived here for a long time would not have such leisure and elegance. They would always see the weathered mountain rocks and smell the cold wind mixed with the smell of blood. They would also feel sentimental about this cruel place where life and death were so easy and where war raged and horses raged in the morning, at a corner near the city gate. Tang En and the others who did not have any missions at the moment imitated the soldiers here. They leaned against the gray-white wall, raised their heads slightly, and chatted casually while enjoying the rare winter sunlight. They had not been here for long, so of course they did not have such feelings. The reason why they maintained this melancholy philosopher-like attitude was purely to bask in the sunlight and enjoy the tranquility and laziness of it. It had been a few days since the chaos at the city gate, and the results had already been dealt with. The captain of the city guards had been hacked to death, and Eltek had also paid the price for it. But no matter what, it was wrong to kill a soldier without permission. But since it was a time of war, he was not removed from his position as a battalion commander. Instead, he was punished with a year's worth of pay and was recorded in the records. As for the remaining soldiers, they did not have the misfortune of being beheaded, but it was more or less the same. They were sent to the Single Sword Battalion of the Frontline Legion. The so-called Single Sword Battalion was actually a type of soldier that wielded a thin longsword. This type of soldier had low defense and high casualties. It could be said that they were a type of soldier that could be used as cannon fodder. This did not mean that this type of soldier was not important. In fact, this type of soldier made up the majority of the legions. The reason for this was because they had a unique advantage. They threw away their heavy armor in exchange for high speed and high frequency of attack. Of course, the result of close combat with the barbarians was imaginable. This was like a double-edged sword, hurting both the enemy and oneself. As for the dozens of carts of goods, they were returned to Fry untouched, probably because Eltek had used his connections. The only slightly troublesome thing was that Tang-en had injured a lot of people at the scene. Later, it was said that there were even a few military officers among them. Of course, the injury was not serious. At most, it was a broken joint. He would be fine after a week of rest. However, this grudge was indeed formed. The higher-ups of the checkpoint did not say anything about this. Of course, it was more likely that they were too embarrassed to find an explanation. After all, no one had died. Moreover, both sides had made a move at that time. In the end, this side had been utterly defeated. Naturally, it would be embarrassing to mention it again. On the other hand, when Tang-en and the others came out now, some soldiers would point at them and whisper, which made them feel quite unhappy. In the past few days, Tang-en had followed Frey's Spearbreaker on a few missions, but the results were a little strange. The first time, they went to a farm to save people. However, by the time they arrived, the battle had already ended. There were only a few corpses of soldiers and civilians left, as well as the ruins of the farm. There was nothing much to say about this. The key point was that in the next few missions, when they arrived at the location where the barbarians were said to frequent, they did not even see a single hare after waiting for half a day. At first, they thought that this was just a coincidence. However, when they heard the brand soldiers chatting, they found that their situation was similar. It was as if the barbarians had disappeared overnight. This situation was, of course, abnormal. The barbarians had spent a lot of effort to conquer this hundreds of kilometers area. Naturally, they would not give it up so easily. The higher-ups of the checkpoint attached great importance to this matter. In the past few days, they often gathered all the military officers together to discuss this matter. The garrison on the city wall had also been strengthened. Obviously, their thoughts coincided with Frey's analysis. In the near future, the barbarians might make a big move. Are you kidding me? Of course it's my longer nonsense. It's not like we didn't see it that time. It's obvious that the barbarians have longer legs. Damn, how can you lie through your teeth like this? Even if it hasn't evolved, there should be a limit. Bet? 1 gold coin. Bet! Brother Tang-en. Oh, everyone's here. Under the lazy sunlight, just as David and Luke were making a bet about whether Luke's hair or the barbarian's chest hair was longer, a voice came from the side. Everyone looked up and saw Elt striding toward them with his right shoulder wrapped in a white bandage. "Haha, Brother Elt, you came at the right time." David laughed and got up. He raised his right hand and pinched the hair on his head that he thought was the longest. "Look, do you think my hair is longer or the barbarian's chest hair is longer?" "Ah? All right, stop fooling around." "Yes, Brother Elt." Tang-en got up and patted the dust off. He walked up and greeted Elt. "You're looking for me? Is your shoulder okay?" "It's fine. It's just a small injury." Elt shook his arm casually and looked at David with a puzzled expression. "That's good. By the way, the brothers from the heavy sword camp." Previously, Elt's injury was scary because he had lost too much blood. Actually, as a veteran who had experienced hundreds of battles, he was quite good at dodging attacks. Thus, most of his injuries were superficial and weren't much of a problem. Because of this, he often came to Lance's camp these days. Tang-en and the others had a good impression of this straightforward man. After a while, they became familiar with each other. More than 80 survived, and more than 10 are still unconscious. Elt's face darkened. He had brought back more than 160 people, but only half of them survived. Naturally, he didn't feel good. But after all, he was used to seeing life and death. He shook his head and said, "Forget it, at least so many people survived. Yes, there are also new soldiers at the checkpoint." After a pause, he gritted his teeth and said with a murderous look, "Damn it, those city guards! Don't think that the matter is over just because they escaped to the first line of defense. I didn't waste my time all these years. I already told them that they will die there sooner or later." During the delay at the city gate, no one knew if anyone died. But it was obvious that they had become Elt's punching bag. Tang En naturally didn't care about this. He patted Elt's shoulder and comforted him. "That's right." After calming down, Elt patted his head and took out a stack of crumpled gold notes with his left arm. The smuggled goods were sold. "The total is 1,480 gold coins. Yes, it's a bit cheap. If it was sold on the market, it would be at least 1,000 more. If it was sold to the barbarians, I'm afraid it would be tens of thousands. But the situation here is different, so we can only sell it to them." After explaining, he took 10 large notes and stuffed them into Tang En's hands. His face was full of shame. "Brother, I'm sorry. I will shamelessly take these 480 gold coins and send them back to our fallen brothers. What do you think?" According to the previous agreement, Tang En and the others would take the majority, while Elt would take a small portion. There was no problem with this distribution. But now that both sides were familiar with each other, Elt felt that Tang En and the others had saved him and robbed the goods. He was only responsible for selling the goods, and yet he took so much. He felt a bit guilty. He believed that if it wasn't for his fallen brothers, with his character, he would help his friends for free. "What are you talking about?" Tang En shook his head and stuffed the 1,000 gold notes back into Elt's hands. He reached out to take the 480 gold coins. 200 of our brothers from the heavy sword camp died. "What can we do with these 400 gold coins? Let's exchange it." He reached out to block it. "Absolutely not. I'm already taking so much from you, Sai. It's not for free. There's something I need your help with." "That's even more unacceptable. Just say the word. How can you take money to help your friends?" After some pushing and pushing, Elt reluctantly agreed to split the money in half until David and the others gathered and persuaded him. With the extra money, Elt's face was filled with gratitude and shame. In the end, he could only express his gratitude and ask urgently, "Brother Tang En, what did you say you needed my help with?" Tang En smiled bitterly and shook his head. He handed the gold notes in his hand to Skinny Monkey. This money was to be sent back to the soldiers who had died in the battle. He then said to Elt, "I want to ask you for some information. Well, there are many people from the Temple of Light here at the front line. I want to know the location of a knight commander named Sylvia." This was Tang En's real purpose. Currently, there was no news from the secret organization. At the Passa checkpoint where he was stationed, even if he quietly asked the brand soldiers, the news was still extremely limited. Only by relying on people like Elt, who had been on the front line for many years, could he get the news quickly. The reason why he asked about Sylvia and not Sessman was because Sylvia was more famous. It wouldn't be easy to get exposed if he asked about her. A word of admiration could cover it up. "Sylvia? The Flower of Nights." Elt was stunned. It's her. Do you know anything about her?" Tang En was delighted. No way, could it be that his luck was really going to explode? But it was obvious that the God of Light wouldn't help him who wanted to kill his own brother. Elt shook his head. "No, I just heard of this famous name before." "Haha, as long as you're a frontline soldier, you should have heard of this name. TSK, Brother Tang En, the Flower of Night Sylvia, hee. Don't worry, I'll remember this." Revealing a smile that any man would understand, Elt decisively thought the wrong way. Tang En naturally wouldn't explain anything. He touched his nose as a silent agreement. At this moment, suddenly, ta-ta-ta, A series of orderly footsteps came from the direction of the city gate, like the sound of war drums. Following which, rows of valiant soldiers holding spears and wearing green armor entered their line of sight. No, no way, Thunder Spear Regiment? Chapter 479. When Captain Fry and the others were sentenced, the Thunder Spear formation breaking team naturally ceased to exist. In the following few years, our division has been trying to revive this name, but, it's too difficult. As you all know, the reason why we're called the Thunder Spear formation breaking team is because Captain Fry and the others would always be the first to break into the enemy's camp. Haha, I heard that many talented people died because of this. Of course, there are some who didn't die, but they still couldn't reach the level of the Thunder Spear formation breaking team. Gradually, this name faded, but there are still a few who remember it. Some are still working hard, and some, well, they've become somewhat disdainful. How should I put it? Captain Fry and the others have not been in the Thunderbolt's army for more than 10 years, and these people have never seen the power of the Thunder Spear formation breaking team. Naturally, they don't respect them. Colorado, that should be the name. He's the commander of the Thunder Spear Regiment. The Academy sent him to the Thunderbolt's army 3 years ago. TSK, I came 7 years ago, and I'm still only a battalion commander. Oh, I'm wrong, this Colorado is also good at leading spearmen, and he's very good at it. No matter if it's a small spearman unit at the beginning, or a medium or large unit later on, he's always done his job well. This is something that people can't help but admire. In the end, it was inevitable that people would compare him to the Thunder Spear formation breaking team. Needless to say, he's inferior, but his potential is still very high. But this Colorado is very arrogant. He once said that he doesn't care about the Thunder Spear formation breaking team at all. In the end, he even named his team the Thunder Spear Battalion. Oh, now it's a regiment. Well, this is just hearsay. Everyone is talking about it, but whether or not he actually said it, I'm not sure. But to be able to see him here. Haha, it should be a coincidence, but I'm really looking forward to seeing him fight with you guys and see the world, haha. As Eltek introduced, the soldiers of the Thunder Spear Regiment neatly walked past. Of course, to measure the combat power of a team, it was impossible to tell just by looking. One had to fight with real swords and spears for it to count. However, there was one thing that could be confirmed. If a team was truly powerful, then their appearance would be different from an ordinary team. From the point of view of Tang En and the others, the soldiers of the Thunder Spear Regiment were indeed extraordinary. Some were calm, some were arrogant, and some were cold. Their expressions were different, but they all had an outstanding spirit. It was a kind of confidence that belonged to an invincible army. After half of the soldiers left, Colorado, who was rumored to be challenging Fry, also appeared in front of everyone. Of course, Tang En and the rest did not know who Kalo was. However, a man riding a tall horse among a group of infantrymen was undoubtedly the commander of the team. The young man's handsome face was solemn and calm. He wasn't wearing any armor. Instead, he was wearing a neat military uniform. His back was as straight as a tree in the wilderness. There were no problems with their military poise and discipline. TSK, you don't say. Just based on his appearance alone, Brother Fry has become Uncle Fry. It's a piece of cake. David smacked his lips and said emotionally. Tang En, Skinny Monkey, and the others around him nodded in agreement. Eltek admired Fry very much. When he saw everyone's expressions, he couldn't help but feel a little indignant. However, when he thought of the bearded Fry and the handsome Kalo in front of him, he finally expressed his silence. The Thunder Spear Regiment was not the only one that entered the city. After they left, there were 2 more regiments that entered the city. However, compared to the neat military formation in front, the soldiers at the back were undoubtedly inferior in terms of their aura. Eltek looked around and found that this was not a famous team, so he didn't bother to continue introducing them. At this moment, "Hey, you guys are here." Everyone turned their heads and saw Fry waving his hand as he walked over from the street in the distance. There was a white envelope in his hand. A few meters behind him, there were more than a dozen Bran officers walking in different directions. They were obviously coming out of the checkpoint command center after a meeting. When Fry approached, Tang En, David, and the others took a closer look. They then looked at each other and shook their heads. The gap. Comparisons are odious indeed. Fry was stunned. He looked down at his clothes and stroked his light green beard with a puzzled expression. What's with your expressions?" "Nothing." David shook his head and then pointed at the street corner with a mischievous look. "Brother Fry, your opponent just went over. His team is called the Thunder Spear Regiment." Fry deliberately paused to emphasize the word thunder. He scratched his head and looked at the street corner. He quickly reacted and said without any special expression, "Oh, they should be the reinforcements sent by the higher-ups. The atmosphere has been a little strange recently." David was obviously more concerned about Frey's attitude. He looked disappointed. "You don't feel anything special?" Fry spread his hands and said innocently, "Nope." "Impressive." Tang En gave him a thumbs up and praised him. He then smiled and said, "How was it? Did you come up with anything?" There wasn't enough information. They were all making wild guesses. If they could come up with anything, they must be astrologers. Fry shook his head and threw the open letter to Tang En. "Here, your letter. I happened to see it at the headquarters, so I picked it up for you." The Bran soldiers were not orphans. Some of them even had children and families. Now that they were in such a dangerous place like the front line, whether it was for themselves or for their families, communication was naturally necessary. But whether it was sent out or sent in, it had to be approved by the higher-up. After all, it was the combat department. Confidentiality was of course important. It was not to the extent of being detained, but there was still a necessary inspection, especially for the Grey Coat Army letter? Tang En was surprised. He then looked at the familiar soft but firm handwriting on the envelope and raised his eyebrows. On the other side, Skinny Monkey was handing the gold notes to Fry. After understanding the situation, Fry and Eltek had another round of negotiation. The letter was written by Josiah more than 10 days ago, but Tang En and the others had been traveling all over the place during this time, so they only received it now. He pulled out a few pages. The content was also about trivial matters, such as "How have you been recently? I'm very worried about you, everything is fine at home, don't worry, etc." It was a standard wife's tone. Of course, this was not the real content. Tang En picked the words according to the prearranged method, reorganized them in his mind, and finally got the real information. It was very concise. It said that the secret organization had set up branches in several cities on the front line. It also included the address and asked Tang En to go there when he was free. As for Sessman's information, they had now officially begun to collect it. This was business. The next thing it said was that little Carol had left the base and left a letter, saying that she wanted to find Tang En. At this time, she was fully mobilizing the secret organization to search for him and asked him not to worry, etc. Tang En was slightly stunned. He blinked as if he could not believe his eyes. He read the letter again. Tang En was not worried about little Carol. He had expected her to leave. Hence, when he was at the base, he, Fei Rui, and the remaining Harry set up a trap to lure little Carol to find Josiah. To be honest, Tang En did not believe in the security of the base. This did not mean that there was a problem with the defense of the City of Dawn. It was just that after Rosa decided to cooperate with Bran, the atmosphere in the base had changed. There were some signs of factions forming. No matter who little Carol had offended, even if she had cut off the manhood of the eldest son of a high-ranking officer, Tang En was not worried. He believed that Rosa would take care of everything. But now, yes, it was hard to say, but if little Carol went to find Josiah, then everything would be fine. With his guidance, the secret organization had gradually become an independent organization. Within the organization, Josiah could be said to have great authority. He was like an iron plate. On the way, Harry and the others would protect her. There would not be any problems. Tang En was now looking at the last line of the letter. Take care of yourself, my husband. Of course, there was no such thing as a husband in this alternate world. This was what Tang En had said when he was joking with Josiah. He had also explained the meaning. But now that he had appeared here so openly, it really gave Tang En a shock. He tried hard to identify it. It was indeed a husband. The word husband on the letter was a little blurry. It was obviously the result of scribbling and editing many times. It seemed very cautious. He could roughly see Josiah frowning as he edited the letter. Finally, Tang En touched his nose and put down the letter expressionlessly. He pursed his lips and said, "Naughty." Chapter 480. Tang En didn't care too much about little Carol's departure. He thought that with Harry and the others secretly protecting her, nothing should go wrong. However, was that really the case? Early morning, a small city in the north. A bald man with a ferocious face and black tattoos on his bare chest was casually walking on the side of the street. Following behind him were 10 or so henchmen with axes hanging on their waists, who also had a murderous look on their faces. Oh, isn't this Master Hu? Good morning. You woke up so early to go shopping? A middle-aged man who looked like a merchant walked over. When he saw these people, his face turned bitter. He then forced a smile and greeted them. "Haha, good morning, good morning. Isn't this who was it?" The big man with a fierce face called Master Hu squinted, nodded, and showed an ugly smile. A skinny underling behind him said, "Boss, this is shopkeeper Bai, who owns a clothing store." "Oh, so it's old Bai. Look at my brain, I still remember." Master Hu shook his head and patted his head. He then hugged the middle-aged man. "How can I be in the mood to go shopping? I'm not a rich man like old Bai who can sit and have money in his pocket." Isn't there a new fruit store in front of the street? They didn't pay protection fees and even threatened us. We need to go over and have a good talk. Hey, old Bai, you know, it's not easy for me to earn this money. See, you agreed. Just like last month, the bastards from the Blood Knife Association came over to eat without paying. In the end, we settled it. We even injured a few of our brothers because of it. Sigh, it's all hard-earned money. But the restaurant had been smashed? You even extorted a sum of money from them for treatment. The middle-aged merchant kept cursing in his mind, but on the surface, he still nodded. He didn't dare to break free from Master Hu's black hairy arms. Master Hu patted the other's shoulder and grinned happily. "Haha, old Bai really understands us. Oh, it's almost the end of the month. You have to pay for your store. See, I told you I still remember you, haha. Don't worry, Master Hu. I'll pay on time. I'll pay on time." The middle-aged merchant's face became even more bitter, but he still nodded. "Haha, straightforward. I, Tiger, like to deal with sensible people like you. As for that fruit seller, I think he doesn't want to live a good life anymore. Let me go over and chop. Oh, be reasonable, be reasonable. We're all civilized people." After a few chuckles, the middle-aged merchant finally got rid of this group of people and hurriedly waved goodbye. One of the lackeys looked back and frowned. He quickly walked to Master Hu's side and said, "Boss, that guy was glaring at us from behind. Should we, Hu? Old Bai, forget it." Mr. Hu waved his hand magnanimously and said nonchalantly, "He's been paid. It won't hurt him to be glared at by others. Besides, we're not like the workers in his shop. We don't have to greet customers with a smile all the time and hope that customers will come again. What we have is an axe and ruthlessness. As long as we are not in front of him, the more he glares at us, the more afraid he will be. Next time, he will have to obediently hand over the money. That's right, next time, we will make him pay double. Motherf asterisk cur, how dare he glare at me? Yes. Boss is indeed boss. You are indeed wise. Ha, you little brat are the best at flattery. Narrowing his eyes, Master who enjoyed it very much and scolded jokingly. Then, he piled up his muscles again and said, all of you, remember this. When we get to the fruit cellar, show your fiercest side and act according to my signal. If I wave my hand and go up to chop people, yes, those workers will be fine as long as they don't die. As for the shop owner, yes, just scare him a little. He still has to pay. After a pause, he continued, in short, I'll say it again. You have to be ruthless enough to make others afraid of you. Take me, your boss, for example. When I was still a lackey, I used to chop people from one end of the street to the other without blinking an eye. Who didn't? Just as Master, who was bragging about his glorious past, he suddenly felt a strong force from his right side. Then, he couldn't help but roll into the side alley. Then, he heard a series of exclamations. One after another, bodies pressed down on him, and he felt a sharp pain. I'll *ck your mother to death. Are you blind? How dare you press down on me? Slap. The underling who was pressing on Master, whose body quickly got up and was slapped in the face. Dizzy, he looked at the entrance of the alley and cried miserably, Boss, I didn't do it on purpose. It was him, they pushed me in. Master who raised his head in shock. His vision darkened and he saw about 5 or 6 people blocking the alley entrance. There were dew and dust on their bodies and they looked travel-worn. Soon after, they were led by a fat man with a smile on his face as he walked over. Uncle Rabbit? That's what you call me, right? Sorry, I was too far away and didn't hear it clearly. Who are you? Motherf asterisk curs, get up. After all, Master who was still vigilant. He looked at these people carefully and kicked his lackey up from the ground. Stopping a few steps away, the fatty spread his hands and said, Don't be agitated. We don't have any bad intentions. Yes, you just came to ask Uncle Rabbit a question? Uncle Rabbit. Master whose muscles twitched and he roared, Rabbit your mother! Chop them to death for me! Clang, clang, clang. Axes were pulled out. 10 lackeys who just got up immediately rushed over. Seeing this, the fatty was a little startled. He looked left and right with a blank face. Did I say something wrong? He casually grabbed the wrist of an axe-wielding man and kicked him away. A ruthless look flashed across his face. Motherf asterisk cur, what kind of world is this? You can't be a good person now. Beat them. Of course, beat them to death for me, didn't have as much weight as chop them to death for me. However, the reality was different. The few young men behind the fatty held back their laughter and went up empty-handed. Then, there was a series of bangs. Those axe-wielding men were cleanly thrown to the ground. After a few more kicks, only groans were left. Before Master who could recover from the situation, the ruthless fatty had already arrived in front of him. He held the axe that he had snatched earlier and slammed it down with the sound of wind. Bang. Motherf asterisk cur, who are you? Can't I ask a question? Can, bang. Can, why don't you answer? Can't you see that I'm in a bad mood right now? I can see, bang bang. F asterisk ck. I can see that you're not answering. That means you're doing it on purpose. No, bang. If you're not doing it on purpose, why aren't you answering? I. Big brother, spare me. After a round of beating, Master who had previously claimed that he would slash from the end of the street to the end of the street without even blinking, was left holding his head and moaning, wailing for mercy. Huff, huff, clang. Throwing away the axe, Master who gasped for breath. He wiped the sweat on his forehead from the intense exercise and kicked again. Don't pretend to be dead. Get up and answer the question. If you dare to say no, you don't have to King pretend anymore. Ah! Master Who finally cried out in pain and lowered his arm in fear. Panting a few more times, Master Who simply sat down and rested. He lifted Master Who up and asked, "What's your name?" Bun Uncle Rabbit. Oh no, Rabbit, it's called Rabbit. After some hesitation, Master Who gloomily reconfirmed his bandit name. What a mess. Uncle Rabbit, right? Master Who loosened his collar and gestured with his hands. Did you see a little girl, about this tall, about 10 years old? She's quite pretty and carries a sickle with her. Master Who shook his head. No. Master Who slapped Master Who's head. You're just brushing me off. Think carefully. Yes. Master Who frowned for a while and finally said with a bitter face, "Big brother, I really didn't see her. If it was just a little girl in her teens, then the target was too wide. But if she carried a sickle with her, then as long as they could see it, it would be easy to think of her." Master Whose face was a bit ugly, but he probably didn't have much hope, so he didn't flip out. He continued to ask, "Okay, then I'll ask you again. Where's the New Moon Hotel?" New Moon Hotel? Bang. You're King local gangster. You don't know this, you don't know that. Are you playing with me? I can tell you very responsibly that if I don't get a satisfactory answer, you're really dead. Let me think. I have an impression. Under the heavy pressure, Master Who seemed to have really thought of something. He held his head and acted like he was thinking hard. Master Who frowned and turned his head. He looked at the big guy lying on the ground and kept groaning. Master Who said coldly, "Can't you see that he's thinking about something? Don't you have any sense of civility? Whoever dares to make a sound will never be able to make a sound again." As soon as he finished speaking, the alley suddenly became silent. Those big guys were trembling and gritting their teeth. Sweat poured down like rain. Suddenly, Master Who was deep in thought, showed a face of ecstasy. Ah bang! The fatty's body trembled, and he slapped Master Who again. "What are you yelling for? Are you trying to scare me to death?" Master Who rubbed his head, as if he had been wronged. He said in a low voice, I got it. Master Who was stunned for a moment, then his face lit up with joy. He patted Master Who's shoulder. "That's my mistake. Sorry. And tell me about it." Master Who naturally didn't dare to bicker with Master Who changed his face faster than flipping a book. He quickly said, "Over at the old street, Blue Moon Street in the west of the city, there's a hotel called the Old Captain's Hotel. It opened a few years ago. It used to be called the New Moon Hotel." Bang! Master Who touched his head again. His fierce-looking face was very conflicted. He looked like he was about to cry. I'm telling the truth, sorry. I hit you too easily. Your bald head really gives off a good vibe." Master Who lowered his head and apologized. Then, he hammered his palm. "Damn it. I was wondering why I didn't hear about it before. It turns out that the sign has changed. Little Carol, where did you learn this from? Do you want to play me to death?" Shaking his head, Master Who rubbed Master Who's smooth head. He got up and said, "Thanks, Master Rabbit. I'll treat you to a drink next time. And no way. Why are you crying? Master Rabbit. Please, big brother, you're out to make a living. You have to be ruthless. Damn it. What are you waiting for? Help me. Hurry up and pull away this damn rabbit." Chapter 481. West of the city, Blue Moon Street. The travel-worn group was still very efficient. After getting the address from Tiger Lord, They quickly found this place and immediately determined the location of the old captain's hotel. The fat man looked around the hotel and waved his hand. 4 people came out behind him and stood in different directions of the hotel. The remaining person jumped directly from the back wall to the roof of the second floor of the hotel. Taking a deep breath, the fat man entered the hotel from the front door. "Welcome, do you need?" After a pause, the kind-looking old shopkeeper looked a little stunned, then looked up and down at the fat man and asked tentatively, Excuse me, are you the stupid Mr. Harry?" The fat man's face didn't change, but the corner of his eyes twitched a few times. He coughed twice. "Ahem, Harry, that's right. And do you know me?" The old shopkeeper smiled and took out a folded letter with an apologetic face. I'm sorry. A little girl named Little Arthur said that if a fat man with a round face and small eyes came over these days, it would be the stupid Harry. And she asked me to give this letter to you." Little Arthur. Damn it, I'm slow again. Muttering in a low voice, the fat man helplessly covered his forehead and then reached out to take the letter. He didn't rush to open it and asked, "And she lived here before?" "Yes, she only stayed for half a day and left last night." "Half a day? And did she say anything else?" "Well, there is." The old shopkeeper nodded, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "She said that if I give you the letter, you will give me a silver coin as a reward." Of course, this is a joke. Little Arthur is very cute. Last night, she chatted with me for half an hour before leaving. And she said she came out to exercise. I asked her to stay here for a few more days for free and wait for you adults to come and pick her up, but she refused. Buzz. A clear bell rang, and a silver coin spun rapidly on the counter, flashing a brilliant halo. The fat man took a few steps back and bowed deeply. "Sorry to trouble you, thank you." With that, he turned and strode out of the hotel. Not far away, more than 10 meters away from the hotel, the 5 people who went out returned behind the fat man again, and shook their heads. "Captain, no one came out of the hotel just now, and we've searched the room, but little Carol isn't in the hotel." As expected, Fatty nodded and unfolded the folded paper in his hand. There were 2 names written neatly on it. One was the name of the city, and the other was the name of the hotel in the city. This again? I really want to die. It's very embarrassing, isn't it? She rushed here in such a hurry, her timing is really accurate. Shock, shame, and sorrow. The few of them read the contents of the letter, and their expressions were complicated. They looked at each other, and in the end, they could not help but shake their heads helplessly. Helplessness was certain. These people were Harry, who had come out of the base with little Carol, as well as the 5 new members of the 3rd batch recruited by the Gray Space. In the beginning, when they saw that little Carol was going to find Josiah according to her plan, they didn't think much of it and just secretly followed behind. However, just as they left the 100,000 mountains, they were shocked to discover that they had lost track of their target. This really scared Harry, and he almost went crazy. If something really happened to little Carol, he really wouldn't have the face to explain to his boss. However, at this moment, a homeless man gave them a note. And 1 silver coin for running errands. As for the content, it was similar to what they had now. The name of the city and the name of the building in the city. At the beginning, there was a symbol of a dagger with a skull. That was the badge of the Gray Space, which was designed by little Carol herself. At this time, Harry and the others also knew that their whereabouts had been exposed. Without thinking, they hurriedly rushed to the location on the note. Unexpectedly, they received another note there, and the content was the same. Clearly, little Carol wanted to use this method to tell them that she didn't want to be followed, but considering Harry's feelings, she left her whereabouts behind to show her safety. However, even so, Harry was still worried. They couldn't let little Carol out of their sight. After all, the world was really chaotic now, so on one hand they contacted the secret organization for assistance, and on the other hand they continued to track her all the way here. Captain, we're one step behind again. But this time, it's only half a day. There's hope if we continue to chase. Not necessarily. Harry pinched the note and narrowed his small eyes. New Moon Hotel. I don't know how little Carol knew the name of this hotel. And maybe it's a travel book. But obviously, she didn't know that the New Moon Hotel had been demolished and replaced with the current Old Captain Hotel. After a pause he continued, think about it. If something happens to little Carol, we'll definitely be finished. Just for example, if that's the case, I won't have the face to live to see the boss again. And isn't it very sad to say this? Is it very sympathetic? Several members of the gray space looked at each other. They were all a little confused by this random way of talking. Sigh, it's really sad. You guys have no sympathy. Harry rolled his eyes and secretly made a disdainful gesture. He continued, listen, brother Harry committed suicide out of guilt because of her. Oh, TSK, anyway, it'll definitely arouse little Carol's sympathy. She must know that we've been searching all the way here. So in order to prevent me from going crazy, she will definitely make sure that we find this Old Captain Hotel that has changed its name. Captain, you mean she's watching us nearby? After sorting out these words, a young man with the fastest reaction said in shock. Yes. F***ck, don't turn your head. Harry hurriedly stopped them from subconsciously turning their heads to search and whispered, let's go, let's get out of here first. Idiot, haven't you lost enough face? Harry touched his forehead and looked like he couldn't bear to look at them. He then waved his hand and said, go first, go first. Remember, don't make any movements to observe the surroundings. After taking a few steps forward, Harry lowered his head and said, yes, that's it. Walk faster and look more anxious. Now is our best chance. Wait until we get out of this city. Oh no, we only have 6 people. The scope is too big. And just 2 blocks. Remember, not only do we have to search carefully later, but also disguise ourselves and pay attention to concealment. If anyone finds little Carol, don't do anything. Everything will wait until everyone has gathered. At this point, Harry, who often wore a smile on his face, looked extremely serious. He quickly glanced around, and his gaze was like a nail piercing into the faces of the few people beside him. I know what you're thinking, but now, put away even the slightest bit of disapproval and self-righteousness. That will kill you. Since the establishment of our gray space, only one person has died, Felix, in the earthquake in the mine pit. Angus, who was seriously injured, suffered comminuted fractures in both legs and is still lying in Dawn City. I don't want your names to be the next, because it's not only about your life and death, but also about the glory and dignity of the gray space. Yes, to be able to join the gray space means that you do have potential in a certain aspect and meet the basic requirement. But to become a qualified member of the gray space, you are still far from it. Don't think that I'm saying this to scare you. The truth is right in front of you. A teenage girl has played you like a fool. And now, because of you, I have to consider the scope of the search. If Michaud, Luke, and the other old brothers were here, even if there were only 6 of us, I'm confident that we can turn this city upside down and find little Carol. Hearing this, the 5 young men lowered their heads in silence, looking a little ashamed. After a while, they clenched their fists and nodded heavily. After saying these harsh words, Harry's expression softened a little, and he put on a smile again, but this smile looked a little bitter. Alas, actually, I'm talking about myself too. I was careless earlier. Little Carol has been with the boss for so long, and was practically taught by the boss himself. She's naturally proficient in hiding, tracking, and other skills. It's only a matter of time before she finds us. If you think about it this way, the stupid Harry is right. Shaking his head with a bitter smile, Harry disappeared around the corner of the street with the few people. The rising sun in the east slowly raised its head, and as if it had removed its makeup, it gradually turned from the previous red apple shape to the bleak white of a fish belly. Apart from the women who had woken up earlier, the people who worked also began to go out. They greeted each other casually, and those who were slightly better off held newspapers and bought yellowish bread from the stalls on the street. They ate as they walked. A day of life for the residents of a foreign city had officially begun. About an hour later, a dozen meters outside the old captain's hotel, Harry and the other 5, who had changed their clothes, met again. When they saw each other, they all shook their heads helplessly. "Captain, should we expand the search area and continue?" "Forget it. Let's hurry to the next city." Waving his hand, Harry's expression was rather bleak as he murmured in a low voice, "The world is really bad. Even children don't have sympathy." Harry and the others, who were quickly heading for the city gate, didn't know that on the roof of a 4-story shop quite far away from the old captain's hotel, which was also the highest location in this small half of the western district, a little girl was lying on her stomach and watching their movements. With a cold expression, she pursed her lips. "Wow, even the stupid Harry has become smarter." Lowering her head, her hair was blown to the side by the cold wind. She opened a large book with a slightly damaged corner in her hand. With one hand holding the book, she took out a feather pen from her pocket with the other hand, put it in her mouth and blew on it a few times. Then she used the pen to scratch out the words of the New Moon Hotel on the paper. After she finished, she put away the feather pen and closed the book. The words, "Journey to the North," were printed in half gold and half black. As for the gilded author's name, it was very dim and couldn't be seen clearly. She flipped through the book and then opened the book to look for the author's name. Pausing, the little girl ran her fingers through her hair in distress and muttered to herself, "The year 545 of the Brand Gregorian calendar? 10 years ago. As expected, it's expired." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.